Good evening, everybody. It's good to see a healthy audience with us tonight, and I know we've got a thorough agenda, so we'll get on with it. It's 6 o'clock. We're here at the Sierra Room of the Carson City Community Center, and it's the evening of Wednesday, August the 19th, 2015. This is the meeting of the Carson City Airport Authority, and if you would, Tamar, please call the roll.
Jefferson Hutter.
Present.
Vice Chair Peterson.
Here.
Member Possack.
Present.
Member Shirk.
Present.
Member Stotts.
Present.
Member White.
Present.
Member Williams. A quorum is present.
Thank you. If you'd please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business, item C, approval of the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. Tonight we'll be approving the minutes of the July meeting, which I think everybody has. Are there any modifications or amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, we'll need a vote for approval of the minutes. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Oh, we do need a motion on that. Okay, a motion to approve the minutes of the past meetings?
I move to approve the minutes of the Airport Authority as given to us.
And need a second?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, need a vote to approve the minutes of the July meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All approved if there be any? All opposed if there be any? Seeing none, the minutes of the July meeting are approved. Item D, modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda to most effectively process the items. I wanted to ask a question, perhaps of counsel, Mr. Takis. In the public hearing section, item number 1 is a briefing, however, not an action item. Is it still appropriate to have it in that section?
Now, you can push it back to a later section if you want to, or you can take it whenever you want to. It's just that we have not proposed any action to be taken in the agenda notice, and therefore the board is not in a position to take action.
Great. Okay, but it still is appropriate to have in the public hearing section?
Yes.
Okay. That having been said, what I would like to do is make one adjustment, and that is to take item number 4, discussion and possible action on authority, comments and feedback on a potential residential development on property adjacent to the western boundary of the airport, formerly the Don Langston parcel. Move that from position number 4 to position number 1, if we could, and we will. And then we'll proceed with the agenda as sequenced otherwise. So item number 4 becomes item number 1. Item E, public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on both agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, please, per person or topic. And if your item requires extended discussion, you can make a request of me to calendar that matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Do we have any public comment at this time? Yes, sir. If you please come on up, and I think there's a log up there. Fill out your information and start by stating your name.
Yes, my name is Ryan Pritchett, and I work for a company called Armstrong Consultants. We are a aviation consulting firm. We do design and planning and master planning. I'm in the area. We are doing 8 airports in the state, and I was at the Lovelock Airport Board meeting, and on my way to Mendon to help with the air show this weekend. Another client of ours, we have 8, and so I just thought I would swing by and express interest in learning more about your airport. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And hopefully you will indeed learn more.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Any other public comment at this time? Again, if you would please sign on in and state your name as you begin.
Good evening. My name is John Uhart. I'm with John Uhart Commercial locally in Carson City. And our office represents a developer who has the 38-acre piece in escrow. And I have a map here to show you. And then of the property. And if I may pass this out.
Oh. Okay, so.
I think
Yeah.
the chairman was asking if there were any other public
Oh,
comment
right. Yeah, no,
before they
sorry
got
about
to
that,
the
John.
first
Okay,
item.
I'm sorry. I thought
That's
the
okay.
item was moved up.
But don't go away if
No,
there's
no,
other
no.
public comment.
You may be, if there's not anybody else in the open public comment period, you're going to be standing right back up again here. Okay, well then, seeing no public comment further at this point, stand right on back up, because our first item in our public hearings will then be our listed item 4, which again is discussion possible action on feedback and authority comments and feedback on that potential residential development. Mr. Ewart, if you'd get us started, sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. May I pass this map out?
Sure.
So the property in question, the 38 acres, is highlighted in red. And due south of it is the Carson Hot Springs there, and the little Hot Springs building just to the right of that. And then the vacant land, NDOT's yard, is at the very end on that southwest corner of the red. And the property, and I had spoken to Carl yesterday, and he wanted to kind of see a Google map of how the runway, I believe that's runway 27, goes over that area. Carson City Airport Authority, I believe, owns that piece of property that's between Gonai Road and the subject property highlighted in red off of Wetco Way there. So a portion of the runway, as you see, takeoff landing, does take up a corner of that property in the northeasterly portion of the property. The developer is proposing, the property is currently zoned tourist commercial, has been for quite some time. Property's been on the market with 3 different brokers over the last 3 to 4 years under that designation of tourist commercial. I am one of the last brokers to have the listing here, and I've had it on the market about 9 months or so, 8 to 9 months. Tourist commercial under the depicted zoning would allow hotel, casino, RV park, restaurant, outdoor facility, golf course, outdoor recreation, those type of uses under tourist commercial. And we as a brokerage community have not been able to attract anyone for any of those type of uses for that property. It just doesn't really make sense to do that there in our opinion. We have, under the previous zoning in tourist commercial, under a conditional use permit, residential development would be allowed. The city changed that ordinance and took the residential designation out as a conditional use permit. So the process that we would have to go through to get approval through Carson City is master plan amendment for residential development and a zone change from tourist commercial to single-family residential. Adjacent to the property, and our developer is a residential developer. And that's what he would like to build there, is residential houses. Due west of the subject property and adjacent to it is all residential off of Louise Drive there, Markway. There are 2 legal accesses into the property. You see Markway is one, and where it says Louise Drive, it doesn't show on the map, but that's Holly Drive. So there are 2 residential streets that dead end into a V ditch currently on that westerly side of the subject property. So we wanted to present it to you, the airport authority, because of being close to the airport, kind of get your comments on it, see what your thoughts are, and kind of go from there, I guess. We're kind of in the preliminary stages. It's only been in escrow a couple of weeks, so we don't have any tentative map to show of the residential development yet. The developer would like to build between 100 and 120 lots in that 38 acres. So about 3 per acre.
Okay. So, as Mr. Ewart said, he and I did speak by phone in the last couple of days, and I appreciate that conversation. One of the things that I had asked was, please do bring the map that you brought, and thank you very much for that, because I think it's important for us to all understand exactly what we're talking about where that parcel sits, and particularly with regard to the alignment of the runway, the relative footprint compared to that of the approach or departure zone of the runway. I'll also share that one of the things that I presented in preparation for tonight was that this authority, obviously, one of the pieces of this process is, as John said, a need to change zoning and an application that would have to go before, well, Jim, you're the expert here, the various organs of the Carson City planning and zoning and Board of Supervisors, as necessary. As the airport, of course, we have a voice in that, which is why you're here tonight, in terms of providing guidance and perhaps advisory to the people who'd be considering that. And one of the things I shared is that we need to really understand, from what I called, 1, a safe and sane standpoint, and 2, from a being thoughtful about the people who eventually will might live in that area, and with our experience around residential use in the environs of the airport, sort of making sure that we have indeed a good compatibility and that expectations are well managed and understood for anybody who ends up owning a house there, because there's a long and storied tradition in the airport world of people waking up one morning and going, oh my goodness, well, I slept last night, an airport was installed. And so it's important that from the outset people recognize what they're getting into and what the realities are of living in an airport environment. So I just say that to kind of frame up for everybody what we sort of talked about. I'm not exactly sure, kind of in this opening discussion, what some of the first steps might be, but perhaps I would turn to either Jim Clegg or to you, Steve, in whatever order, to maybe, to the extent that we have awareness now of the location and the time that we've had to contemplate this to date. What are some of the considerations? And I turn to you, Jim, first, our airport engineer, especially as that relates to some historical work you said you did with Walt Sullivan and looking at some prior applications. How does this parcel fit in with the various footprints and zones and incursion areas, at least from an FAA standpoint and from the airport engineer standpoint?
Yeah, to summarize what you said was, in 2005, Walt Sullivan was the planning director for Carson City, and he asked me to prepare a diagram of the city, and this is a blow-up of the area. That particular parcel at the time it had a restricted site because of the elevation of the ground. So the highest building at that time that could be built there was 20 feet high. Now, Since that time, the freeway got constructed, and so the grading changed. We haven't looked at it since that time, so I don't know if that building height restriction still applies, but what I really suggest is that you contact the FAA and you submit Form 7460 and let them know. If you need help, I'll give you my card and you can contact me. We just need information about building heights, and what they do is they take longitude, latitude of each building with its elevation. They compare it with their records to see how it affects the airport, and they'll let you know whether it's even allowed.
Okay,
I mean, that'd be the first step I would do.
okay, very good.
Yeah.
And then,
I'll pass these out.
Sure. And, yeah, we'll, just before we come back to the board, Steve, is there anything from your side that you'd mention at this point, or any comments?
I just want to say that I encouraged, when I talked to John Uhart, I encouraged him to come to the meeting and give you an overview early. I think early communication is always the best. To the extent that problems arise, if you address them early enough, usually you can find a solution. If you're already pretty far down the road, it seems like you don't find solutions, you find conflicts. And so I encouraged him to appear here just to lay it out so you could be thinking about it, and also give any kind of preliminary comments. And the one preliminary comment that you made is probably the one that jumps out the most, which is we don't want a situation where we're creating complaints about the airport, and so full disclosure of the location of the airport would be important. One other small adder is that, and I'm not seeing it in this plan as a problem, but the FAA assurances, when the city receives money for us at the airport through the FAA grants, one of the commitments is that we won't do land use items that are inconsistent with an airport. And like I said, I don't think this is per se inconsistent with an airport, but I think you need to look at it closely from that standpoint too, because we accept a lot of money from the FAA.
Thank you, Steve. So let's come back to the board. I'm sure that there are plenty of questions. I think, Jim, you, Member Shirk, had one to kick off with.
well, I was just going to say, once you get past that hurdle, I think you know the procedure within the city, the planning division, and how that whole
Yes,
procedure
we've already
goes.
spoken to them.
Right, so once you get over the big hurdle, I think you already know the course you have to take. Right.
We do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that, you know, as we start this conversation, and I totally agree with Council Takis, that, yes, early communication is best, and what Mr. Clegg mentioned, I think absolutely is the first step before anyone gets, you know, in deeper than they might, is let's clear that hurdle of understanding what the FAA's take is on, you know, I think that as it was suggested, the outcome is, you know, almost certainly not, no, we can't have houses in that spot, but it's important for your client to understand what the practical restrictions might be and what that envelope looks like from both a construction size or any restrictions or limitations.
Okay.
So I think that's an important first step.
And we'll do that. And Jim, you'll work with us on that?
Sure, it doesn't take a real long time to do that,
Okay.
but we do need specific locations for buildings.
Okay. So you need a tentative map
Right.
of some type. Okay, very good.
And the elevations are going to be really important because when the freeway was constructed, Mr. Langson he sold dirt basically to the construction company that was doing the freeway, and then he also accepted money from them to dispose of I guess dirt material. I know it was material that they pulled out of like the Lampa Ranch area when they were putting the sewer extensions in that were in conjunction with the freeway construction. So where it ended up, I don't know, but I do recall that he came to us and asked us if we wanted to join with him to grade it smooth across the top, and his proposal would have cost us money, so we very gracefully declined. But my recollection is the property is now at a lower elevation than it was when Walt Sullivan was asked us to look at it. So
There's a portion of the property that's on the west end, that's next to the Carson City property here. This is Carson City. Yeah. This little pad site here, this one right here, is elevated. This up probably about 8 to 10 feet higher than the rest of this here. So there's a fence that runs here on the westerly side. Yes, and right here, there's a fence that runs here. And this area right here is elevated about 8 to 10 feet higher, this entire piece than this lower piece. So we're not sure why that happened.
Couldn't sell all the dirt.
That's what it, now we got our answer now.
Yeah. So I think that, again, it's early stages, and that's a good thing. I want to make sure that, for Mr. Uhart's benefit, being here tonight, and for all of ours, maybe this will stimulate any other thoughts or comments at this time. But just asking Mr. Takis again, what is the airport authorities' official voice in deliberations on that zoning change? And I think it's important for everyone to kind of understand, since we've got this opportunity, what is our role going to be in this?
as Supervisor Shirk was pointing out earlier, the process really goes to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. The Airport Authority's role is simply to be one of the parties that comments on it at either the Planning Commission or Board of Supervisors stage. So if a position is established here, you would discuss it at an open meeting, you would vote on it, and then somebody, probably be me, would end up being directed to go present that position to the Planning Commission. And that's the way we've handled it before. If you don't have a position, then there's no reason to go further, but to the extent there's something you want to communicate, that's the way it's done. And it doesn't have to be me, by the way, that goes. It could be Tim or Jim or one of you.
Great, thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure we understood for best effectiveness what kind of the sequence of events is. From my standpoint, it sounds like we want to understand the FAA, position on, excuse me, the proposed use in that location, and then based on what we find out there, I think we'd be in a better position to look at some of the more airport-specific things. But of course, our first hurdle to clear is the FAA, as is yours, and we can understand where they are.
So when we get FAA response, do we set another meeting with you to talk about that response, or will that go through Jim only, or how does that work?
Okay, so that feedback I would coordinate with Jim and with Tim.
Okay.
And what that will do is provide information that can be reviewed, and then we can, if it looks like something that we can move, then we can agendize that at our next meeting, provided this keeps moving promptly. And at that point, again, as Mr. Takis says, kind of have a position.
Okay.
If that sounds like a game plan.
One last question. Do you have monthly meetings or quarterly meetings? Or
Monthly meetings.
Monthly.
So we'd be meeting the third Wednesday of September.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Peterson had a question.
Mr. Uhart, thanks for coming. This is partly just to kind of phrase what is one guy's perspective on this. I don't claim to speak for the board. I suspect they would sympathize with my position. Several years ago, I lived in Texas, and I was closely associated with two different airports, both public use but privately owned. One of them was sued by the neighbors, claiming both danger and a reduction in their property values, and the court ultimately found totally in favor of the airport. But after the owners of the airport had to spend tens of thousands of dollars apiece to do that, and you can imagine the emotions and sensitivity that creates when you really had to defend what you knew all along was your lawful position. The other airport, which was a public use, out in the fields, it was out in the middle of nowhere for a long time, and a developer, and this is north of Dallas, came out and developed a parcel not on the extended runway line as you have, but well off the center line and a little bit down to the south. And it suddenly became aware that the salespeople for that developer were telling prospective customers for the land they were going to have the airport closed. No, it didn't happen. But meanwhile, now we had property owners calling daily to the FAA complaining about noise, and the airplanes are over my house and I can't sleep and my babies are crying. We all get really sensitized to this question, and you're parked or asking to be parked right in the middle of not just off the departure end, but the preferred departure end of the runway. You're going to have the vast majority of every aircraft that takes off out of that airport going right over this property. And I anticipate some unhappy people whose babies are woken up day and night. So I will be very sensitive to whatever you're asking for. Now, I'll take it one step further. You're not going to be the developer. You're the broker. You want to sell the land. There's going to be somebody who comes along, and he is going to try to turn this into something he can make money on. But there's a process, I think, if I'm hearing this right, where in order for that to happen, you need to get some kind of a change to residential use out there. I don't know that there's anything that would make me comfortable that houses are out there. But I would say to you, to the extent that you came forward and there were guarantees that said anybody who complains loses their house and has to move, I realize that's ridiculous, but again, we don't really want to entertain, how many houses? 120 homes of complaints and lawsuits and threats and so on in perpetuity for something down there. So I don't have any idea what the protection would be that would make me comfortable, because I've lived through it and it's very painful. That's all.
No, thank you for that. And you know, I think that you know, there are a couple of mechanisms that Council Takis and I have discussed that, you know, and I pass this along to you, Mr. Ewart, that are out there that provide different shades of awareness. And, you know, in the state of Nevada, if I understand correctly, residential buyers are not required to formally acknowledge, you know, in a I guess, signed disclosure. Was that what you said, Mr. Takis? The presence of the airport, but maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that there's any mechanism out there, the other being an avigation easement, that takes away what Member Peterson's, you know, realistic concern is, which is you can sign all the paper you want, you can have various forms of protection, but it doesn't stop you from, you know, waking up one morning and finding an airport that you don't like. But would you take a second, Steve, to just talk about kind of what those mechanisms were?
Yes, in the past, in somewhat distant past, we used to require that if somebody's developing something near the airport, as a condition of getting their city approvals, they would execute an avigation easement, you know, that would be recorded with the land that would say, hey, there's an airport nearby, there's going to be airplanes in the airspace. It's essentially what it says. The Supreme Court found that requiring those avigation easements as a condition of getting a governmental permit without compensating the landowner for those avigation easements made them unenforceable. And so, and this occurred at a time where I believe Walt Sullivan was on the Airport Authority and was also Community Development Director, and so we stopped doing that. So the next best thing is, you know, if you can't require them to give up some kind of airspace right or some acknowledgement that there's no noise, what you can at least do is do some form of disclosure so that people buying the house are aware there's an airport nearby, that it's a public use airport, therefore, although its primary utilization is during the day, it could be any time of day or night. And there's nothing the airport can do to stop flights at night. And as a result, there may be noise, aircraft noise. The other, I guess, part of the disclosure that would probably be appropriate here in Carson City is that we have a relatively high percentage of warbirds, older airplanes, which by their nature were made to fly in combat in World War II. They were not made to be quiet. And so when the warbirds, those kinds of planes are flying, they are noisier than other airplanes. But again, we're a public use airport. We're not allowed to restrict their use. So some form of disclosure is probably the next best step. Again, this is something that as the developers' plans firm up, it's probably something we can sit down and discuss with them so we can craft something that will protect them as well, because if they go out and sell the land and end up with people complaining that something wasn't fully disclosed to them or they felt like something was misrepresented, the developer's going to be, in a hot water position, as well as the concern that we would have that it would be detrimental to the airport growth, as Member Peterson said.
Question, Steve.
Sure.
Steve, on a point you said, you can't ask for an navigation easement without compensation. This is currently not zoned as residential. It is what it is now. Might there be a process as a part of changing the zoning where, as a requirement of that, the residential comes with a navigation easement and we pay $1 an acre? The amount of compensation, I doubt, is set by the Supreme Court. There just has to be an exchange of value, I guess, as you attorneys say. And in fact, there is, we might argue, quite an increased value apparently by converting it from commercial and entertainment to residential. So they could almost, have to pay us for the upgrade, as it were. But it would seem to me that it could be constructed to where the shift from one use to the other through some mechanism could contain a navigation easement and have recognition of value for that.
That's something I can research. It's a good thought.
Great. Well, I think that there's a step forward, and again, the more kind of detail that we can understand from that FAA answer and explanation, from a little more detail around the developer's intent, if we move that forward and end up agendized for next month, it would be great to maybe hear from your client, the developer, and get a little sense of the detail again there. I would just make mention that we have, at least for our based traffic or our based tenants here at the airport, a local advisory that says, hey, please, because of the residential area at Louise Drive and West, when possible, make your departures off runway 27 a left turn over Walmart and the retail center there. Now, okay, that is something that we can't enforce. It's something that comes second to flying the airplane. I just note that that's something that, as good neighbors, our pilots attempt to do. Well, that left turn puts them right over this property, and so we can't cut it any closer than that. So I would just suggest that everyone should be really clear in their minds up front. There's going to be the loud side, the departing traffic, most of the time right over the tops of folks' heads. So that's good. That would be a reality that should not be ignored. And Mr. Clegg?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that when the FAA gets the email that we've submitted this to them, they typically take 45 to 90 days to make a determination. So what we can do for you is, if you have a good topographic map, we can predict what's going to happen. And so that would give you some comfort, or I don't know if it'd be comfort, but some information whether it will be approved by the FAA.
Well, that would be very helpful to move to an answer sooner than later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Shirk.
I just want to clarify that if you're seeking the assistance of our legal advice, that is billable to you, not billable to the airport authority, correct?
I don't think he was asking for any legal advice, but you're talking about engineering. To the extent that we are helping an applicant with some application that's coming before this authority, the Carson City Municipal Code says we can bill that back to the applicant. I don't know that we're at that stage yet, but That's the answer to
And
your
sooner or
question.
later, we'll probably get there, so I just want to make sure that that's billable to Mr. Ewart.
Okay. Well, I think that is about as far as we can take that at the moment. Any final comments that you wanted to make?
I don't think so. Thank you for your time, and I've taken some notes here, so I'll get with Jim, and we'll get the maps together and everything we need.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming tonight. Well, yes, Mr. Stotts.
Yeah, I did want to make a comment, but if you
Please.
close it, I'll pass.
No, go right ahead.
All right. Since you came before us asking, get some idea how we feel about this sort of a thing, I'd like to add to Member Peterson's comments about the problems with neighbors cranky about the noise. There have been airports closed around the country because houses were put in after the airport was there for 50 years. And as outrageous as it may seem, these people moved into these communities and then they closed down the airport because they didn't like the noise. That makes us pretty sensitive about having residential areas this close to the airport. The area, Carl mentioned the fact that we have a noise abatement departure procedure. That came into effect because the people in the Cottonwood Trailer Park, which is further to the west of where you want to put this residential area in, complain about the noise. So there's going to be, I think you said 120 units would be going into this area?
It's tentative.
Okay, well, that's 120 people who could end up complaining about the noise. That's a pretty good size, could be a pretty good political force, which would bring great problems to the airport if they all decided to get together and complain about the noise. And there's another thing. It's going to get noisier. The airport authority is trying to attract more business jets to the airport, and it's not going to get better. It'll probably get a little bit noisier. The business jets these days are a lot quieter than they used to be, but we're also attracting more warbirds, which are not quieter than they used to be. So just to give you one more thing, people are so sensitive to noise. There is an individual that lives in Wellington. This is the far western side of Carson City, probably as the crow flies, 3 or 4 miles away from the airport. He has called the airport manager on numerous occasions to complain about the noise when a Southwest jet inbound to Reno flew over. So you can see, all it takes is one crank like that in this development, and it's going to go badly for the airport. So I just wanted to give you a little heads up on that.
Thank you.
Since you were looking for the comments.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Okay. Thank you, Member Stotts. Okie dokie. Well, we will look forward then to continuing the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. That'll bring us to the new item number 2, which is a briefing on the progress of addressing of buildings on the airport. Manager Rowe.
As discussed at the last meeting, we put together a tenant meeting last Thursday, the 13th, and we had a pretty good turnout of tenants who lodged their concerns regarding the addressing. These were all good questions. One was, if Steve would like to comment here in a bit about the legal descriptions of the leaseholders and the possibility that there would be a charge and reconveyance of their leases. We think we've settled that. But there were also good questions regarding the way the addressing has been done, using numbers for the taxiways, buildings, suite numbers. It seemed a bit convoluted. Present at the meeting was the Dave Rubin, Chief Torillo, both of the fire department, and Eric Schmidt of Douglas County GIS, who actually put together this system that we handed out last month. Most of the questions indicated that those present, that more study had to be completed, and we basically sent them back to the drawing board. because we felt that there was a much easier way to do it. Another thing that came out was that the Board of Supervisors could come up with some kind of waiver for the airport instead of having us comply with the addressing system for commercial areas and residential areas, because airports are different. So we're going to launch a new set of meetings. This may take a little while. Dave Rubin came up to me after the meeting and asked me, he says, well, this isn't really going to be finished by October, is it? And I smiled and said no. So I will keep the authority members up to date on what we're planning to do and how things are progressing. It will probably be a couple more months before we have something tangible to present to the authority. And that's really all I have. It went for a long time, but there's really nothing to add. It's just back to the drawing board.
Steve, anything to add there?
I'll be brief as well. There were a couple of legal issues that popped up. But, you know, fundamentally, I think the thing we want to keep in the back of our minds is the purpose of the exercise was so emergency services can find somebody if there's an emergency on the airport. And I think everybody who was there agreed that's a good and noble thing if there's a way we can do it without creating a lot of problems. But against that background, one of the issues that popped up is, will I have to change my deed to my hangar? And one tenant who coincidentally has a hangar right next to mine and, was fairly vocal and very much did disagree with me when I told him, no, it won't change the legal description. So after the meeting, I grabbed his deed from him and read through it with him to say, yeah, your deed says unit H13 or whatever it is of this particular development on this map recorded on this certain day. That will never change. You know, that's what the legal description of his property is. If we renumbered this and instead of H13 it became H11 within a block of a building, that doesn't change his deed. It will not require anybody to go back to a title company. But the validity of the complaint that was made is it could be confusing to someone. And if it's confusing to someone, yeah, well, that's something we really would like to avoid as well, particularly if it's confusing to a title officer. I don't think it would be, but it could be confusing to people. But we marched on that path, so the answer to that first question is no. No matter how we address this, it doesn't change the legal description, it doesn't change the ownership rights that a hangar owner has in their condo ownership. But there could be some confusion. We want to avoid that. And then the next question is, what is the effect of address changes on U.S. postal deliveries? Well, my initial answer to that was there's no impact. We don't have postal deliveries inside the fence. What I didn't notice until we got into the meeting is they had proposed changing the addresses of FBOs that currently operate on the airport but are external to the fence. So, for example, Sterling Air had a new address. They gave a new address to, it appears, I can't really tell, but it looks like they may have given a new address to the Ron Kitchen and Bob Thomas hangars. They most certainly gave a new address to Weaver Aircraft and Cactus Air Force and George Byard's hangar. Well, to the extent there are businesses there, and El Aero, to the extent there's businesses there, that can be a significant expense and a real burden to change your address. And so my initial reaction is wrong. You know, there is a proposal in here to actually change addresses. In addition, on the northwest part of the field and the very north end of the field, they were going to assign new addresses to those businesses as well. So that's problematic, and we relayed that back to them. And then the third question was, does the Carson City Municipal Code require it being addressed this way? And a common theme that we heard during the meeting is this is the way the post office does it, or this is the way the code requires it to be done. But as Tim mentioned a minute ago, there is an exception in the Carson City Municipal Code that says you can exempt from their normal addressing process if it doesn't fit. And during that meeting, we learned that there is no addressing system that fits an airport. And it wasn't just our airport they're talking about. They were telling us generally, when you look at airports, there is no addressing system that seems to fit. Probably the most productive thing that happened is via comments from some of the people who were at the meeting, they suggested, well, why aren't we treating this like a multiple building apartment complex? You have multiple buildings, you have one street address like we do right now, the 2600 College Parkway, and then you have different unit numbers for the different building complexes, and then you simply put unit numbers that make sense on those on the individual units. That way, you've got a scheme that apparently works right now for apartment complexes, and then you've got a way to map this into your GIS system so the fire truck and the ambulance know where to go to get to their destination. It was unclear to me why, but there was a certain amount of pushback from the GIS guy on that. And his response is, well, I don't know if the GIS system will accept that. And that kind of threw us for a little bit of a curve, because it seems like it works right now for complex apartments. Why wouldn't it work here? Another idea that was kicked out is, what we're really talking about is just emergency vehicles getting to buildings. Maybe there's some other numbering scheme that we could use solely for that purpose. We paint a red box on the outside of the building with a building number, and we have smaller numbers for the hangars. And if somebody calls 911 and says, well, I'm out at the airport, the 911 operators can say, step outside and tell me what the numbers are in the red box. And now you've got a way to send the emergency services. So that's another idea that was kicked up that the team of the fire department guys and the GIS guy, we're going to go back and look at. So that's where we are right now. It's not happening quickly. I know that the fire chief, among others, had said, you know, can't you just get something in place, because we don't want to be hunting around for somebody who's called in with chest pain and not be able to find them. You know, the tragedy is if you don't get there in time, you may have a tragedy on your hands. So that's where we are, but no action is being recommended for you to take on this item at this point. At this point, it has become a briefing because of the nature of the discussions.
Thank you for that. And I tend to agree that there has to be something that is done out there, whether it's major corporate campuses, universities, apartment buildings, as has been mentioned. And I guess one of the great questions for the fire department and the GIS people is, well, how is that, dealt with? I'm trying to not use the word addressed because the pun's too bad. But how is that handled? Because indeed, maybe they do load a map of that property with those building numbers or something in there. I think that there's a workable way forward that we should explore. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. There may be something that's a split scenario where, if you're on Arrowhead Drive, if you're on College Parkway with one of those addresses as an FBO, we want to be conscientious of the impact of changing the business addresses. We also want to make sure we facilitate this emergency piece. And I think that maybe by scoping it as such, this is not a U.S. Mail, USPS matter. This is something purely in the EMS overlay. Might be good. Questions from the authority? Member White.
Noting that some sort of addressing scheme is going to come to the airport, should we move forward now asking that ordinance be changed to give us an exemption? Because it's obvious we're going to do this. And if we need an exemption to the ordinance, I think we need to move forward on that now.
And that would be one way to proceed. My own sense is I don't think the Board of Supervisors would force an addressing system upon us. And so I don't really see that as the course of action that's going to occur, where we would have to head it off, take kind of a preemptive strike like you're suggesting. My recommendation is see what else they come up with. If we got to a point where someone in the city was arguing, well, we have to go forward with it anyway, even though the airport doesn't like it, then I think we go to the Board of Supervisors. But I don't think we need to have the ordinance changed, because the ordinance currently allows for an exemption to accommodate special circumstances. And here we pretty clearly have special circumstances. Nobody's quite figured out how to number buildings on an airport.
Any others? Okay, well, Mr. Rowe, look forward to kind of continuing that discussion and seeing what great ideas are arrived at. I know that we'll get to something that, that finds the right balance.
Somebody suggested this week that perhaps they could look at some sort of grid system, number the buildings, certain numbers within that grid, and kind of stick with that, using the existing hangar numbers as the suite numbers. That seems to make the most sense. Whether they do that or not, we don't know yet, but it has been suggested and passed along to Mr. Schmidt.
Great. Well, and that's exactly the sort of hybrid solution that might work out well, because, yeah. Okey doke. We'll look forward to hearing more about that going forward. Takes us to item number, our item number 3, discussion and possible action on notification from Cricket Communications of their intent to terminate their antenna lease on our tower, and options for the authority to consider requiring Cricket either to fully remove their equipment from the site or various other forms of abandonment and various payments that go along with those options that we would be entitled to. Mr. Rowe.
As previously discussed, we have had notification by email from ARQ Wireless, a gentleman by the name of Ryan Cockrell, of Cricket's intention to terminate the lease. And we have not received a formal written termination notice as yet, other than an email. But Cricket was purchased by AT&T in 2014, and we're not real sure, but we've heard that the site may already be off, but the lease is still current. Within 120 days of the formal notification to vacate the lease, Cricket has 120 days to vacate. Now, they've given us a couple of options, and I just talked to Mr. Cockrell again today, and one of the options which I would like to have considered is that Cricket will leave their entire facility and pay the airport $12,500 to do so. They will take, there's a company in Las Vegas that they will have removed the cabinetry and the batteries. Everything else will remain the same, so the basic infrastructure will stay. The other option, option number 2, is that Cricket removes their lines, antennas, radio cabinets, batteries, basically leaves the platform, electrical service, and the antenna mounts, and gives the airport $5,000. So $12,500 sounds a lot better, and that is the alternative that I would recommend. This company in Las Vegas that Mr. Cockrell mentioned, what they do is they remove this infrastructure equipment and they refurbish it and sell them to third world countries. He told me today that this equipment might be destined for Costa Rica. Also, there's another alternative if this doesn't come through, is Mr. Pacheco, who works for Total Environmental Power Systems, who is the contractor for AT&T, who actually works on our tower for AT&T, so they're very familiar with it. His company would remove the equipment, including the batteries, for approximately $4,000. The batteries require hazmat handling, as the company in Las Vegas would also have to handle them in that way also. So that's our 2 alternatives.
So, to recap, we have an offer of $12,000 to leave everything but the batteries. We have the alternative.
I'm sorry, they would remove the cabinets and the batteries.
Okay, the cabinets and the batteries, but all of the infrastructure, the pads under the equipment sheds, the electrical service, et cetera, is in place, would remain in place, and also the antennas would remain in place. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Holding that thought for a second, because I want to ask Mr. Takis in a second what kind of liability we might have to have that equipment remaining on our tower, but now under our ownership, I guess. we're also reminded of your comment that EPS, or Total Environmental Power Systems, would charge $4,000 to take everything away, including the batteries. We might assume that there is even a smaller number that would have them take away anything else we didn't want. And where I'm going with this is, 12,000 even minus 4,000 is still 8, and that's a better alternative than what Cricket pays us if they take it all. And I think there may be some value in having the infrastructure, the pads, for a future tenant to come in and do the build out of some service on that tower, not having to put all that back in. So there is, I think, a sweet spot here. But I wanted to ask the question, open with the question, do we have any concern, or is there any liability we incur for them basically cutting us this check, turning over the remaining items, granted not the batteries, to us, and having that stuff on the tower under our responsibility?
Well, the biggest liability we would have is if we attempted to remove it ourselves, and in the process we interfered with one of the other tenants on the tower. That would be the big thing. So if we could at least have it tagged or something so we know what it is, which equipment it is, we could probably work more easily with a contractor to remove it. But I want to back up just a minute. There's actually additional options here. The way the lease was drafted, it said that they could give us notice of termination with 60-day written notice of termination at any time. They haven't given us that 60 days. They've just preliminarily told us we're going to be terminating it. And so the expectation from Mr. Cockrell was that they would probably try and terminate it coincident with the end of the year, which means we'll probably get the notice in late October that they're going to terminate on December 31st. That's my expectation. But what the lease says is once it's terminated, they have to remove everything, including the pads down to 2 feet below ground level, the power, everything out of there. And the reason we drafted it that way is we want to make sure we didn't get left with anything behind that could be a problem for us. So what this contractor for Cricket is saying is, yeah, we know we have to do that under the lease, and if that's what we have to do, that's what we'll tell Cricket has to be done. But we want to offer you some money for us to do something less. Now, clearly, it's not an issue for us unless we had some other use for that property where we needed to have those pads removed. I mean, I don't know what the point would be on us having them remove pads and remove the power lines that run from the box to the pads where the equipment cabinets currently reside, or the fence around the pads. I mean, the most likely outcome is that once these guys are gone, somebody else is going to want to use it, and that partial construction is probably going to be advantageous to them and to us. In fact, we can probably reflect it in whatever deal we make with them. So it doesn't really make sense for us to say, yeah, take it all. But the flip side is there are hazardous materials there, and chief among them are the batteries, but also there are portions of electronic components that contain heavy metals and stuff that we don't really want to have to deal with or let it deteriorate into the ground. And so ideally, we would get rid of the stuff that's dangerous, but to the extent they have brackets up on the tower that you could mount other antennas, it really doesn't make sense for us to pass up money to make them take those down. And so some option of them paying us is probably the sensible way to go. I don't know what else is out there that could be hazardous other than the batteries. And they're offering to take the batteries in the cabinets and give us $12,500. My gut is telling me that's probably the way to go, particularly, as you say, if this other company will come in and take the rest for $4,000, we know we're ahead of the game then. But that would be the consideration. Okay, what else is out there and what can bite us? And I have some experience with this stuff, having worked on a lot of telecommunication towers from a legal standpoint. I've never climbed up these guys, but and I do know that there's stuff up there that has value. I'm frankly a little surprised that Cricket wouldn't come in and at least take down the transmitters. You know, antennas are cheap to replace, but the transmission equipment, that's usually kind of expendy stuff. And I would think they would want to come and grab that to recycle it somehow into their own operation. But, you know, I don't know enough about the inside of their business to know when it makes sense to take something down and when it doesn't. So from my standpoint, I think the recommendation that Tim is making, that you take the 12.5 offer, I think that's a good recommendation.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Member White. Yes, Member White.
How long has this Cricket equipment been on site?
2002.
I would suspect that the reason they're offering to let us have it is because it is not usable to anybody else. Otherwise, they would take it. Otherwise, why are they abandoning the site if it's a viable site? So I think if there's a way we can make a few dollars out of it, I think we should go ahead and do that. But I wouldn't have any expectation that another tower user would want to use anything that's there. Likewise, as requirements for building codes and such move forward, it may well be that what is there is not usable to another user as a recycle, reuse type of a thing.
You know, on that point, you might be right. It could be that the equipment up there is obsolete and it's more of a detriment than a value to anyone. I've never used Cricket's communications, and I've never done any work for them, so I don't know what frequencies they broadcast on. I'm guessing they're on the same frequencies or similar frequencies to the other companies that are like in the 1900 megahertz band. And so it seems to me that equipment, unless you're changing the service you're rolling out, like when Verizon changed to their 3G service and AT&T changed to their 3G service, where they're now using other frequencies where they have to put other equipment up. Unless you're doing that, usually that broadcasting equipment continues to work. So I think it's got to have some value to someone, but like you said, it could be it's just obsolete. But one thing that probably does have value is some of the mounting hardware. And because you know, of course, that's usually custom to the design of the antennas and transmitters, but I know that that stuff has value because I've seen people recycle that stuff before. So I think there's some value there. But again, if I understand your comments, that tends to support taking the 12.5 that we can get for it. So.
Yeah, and I think the most universally usable potential stuff is not what's on the tower, as you're suggesting, Member White, but the infrastructure, the power supply, the pads down on the ground. And that doesn't care what frequency it's on. So I think there's some value there, and you know, we're seeing some good options. Other questions or comments from the board? Member Stotts.
This may seem a little bit far-fetched and maybe not even related, but at some point it seems it would be nice to have a webcam or an airport cam mounted somewhere on the airport. For the simple reason that pilots like to look at something before they go there, and if they can get real time on what's the, you know, what the conditions are like, there's, you know, it's likelier that they'll fly in there. Now, whether or not anything here would be of any use for putting up a webcam, I don't know. But if it were, then it would be nice to retain it for that purpose.
We'll point the camera to let people judge your landings. Yeah, no, I mean, there could be a number of items of value there.
One obvious item is the cabling. It's already in there, and I think that's probably one of the things they want to avoid having to tear out, because A, it's a pain, and B, cabling runs in some of the same conduit that the other carriers have, and you really don't want to be pulling cabling out of conduit with other carriers in it.
Tamara, keep me honest. Is this where we go for members of the public comment? Yeah.
If you're done discussing it as members.
Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the public on this matter? Then we would come back to the board in need of a motion for any potential action on this.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we table this until we receive a formal notification and a firm offer on what they'd like to do and consider the merits at that time.
Can I, well, I'm sorry if I'm out of order, but I just want to alert you to one other thing, which is we were notified that if we didn't take action, they would assume that we wanted to have them remove all the equipment because they have to make those plans in advance. And so if you table the action, the way they're going to, at least what they've told us, they're going to interpret that as is us saying, no, we don't want to take any of the options. They should be obligated to come remove all the equipment.
Do we have these offers in writing, or is this a verbal conversation?
Well, the 12.5, I think, is verbal, but the other one were in emails to us where they, well, actually, it was in a letter they outmade. Was it a letter or email? I can't remember.
It was in an email. The verbal was a 12.5 today, and with the removal of the cabinets and the batteries. That was over the phone today.
Let me be specific on my concern, and I'll pull back my motion at this point. In the businesses I've run, so often somebody says, there's got to be value there. Let's don't throw it away. And we trip over it for 15 years. And it just becomes a nuisance without any value. And we could have had it cleaned up, ready to go for the day that somebody says, I can use that area. So I will just speak out now. I would be inclined to be in favor of whatever proposal cleans it up to the maximum where we have no future concerns about what's left. That could leave the pad. Digging up concrete seems like a retrograde action, but the difference in my mind between 12 or 5 or 8, frankly, is small money compared to having anything left out there that could interfere with future activity or opportunities or leasing in that area.
So to clarify, we have or will have shortly a written offer capturing the $12,000 number. Is that correct, Mr. Rowe?
I don't know. I just talked to him on the phone today, but I can certainly call him tomorrow. But having heard what Member Peterson said, that also makes a lot of sense.
I might toss out, either in the form of a motion or not, that we ask them for a written proposal of their multiple options so that we consider the firm numbers of what they're giving us and pass around the written descriptions of what they propose and compare those to the other alternatives. Right now, I'm even confused on who would be removing what. I've heard actually one of your descriptions made me think 2 people are taking the batteries. They might think that's a lot of the value, and we get into a contest. We don't want to get involved with that. We want it neat and clean. We'll take option B and 2 from column B, and we're out of here.
Yeah, and I Member Peterson, I understand the confusion there. The 2, just to help clarify, the 2 things that were being mentioned, and indeed there is, this $12,000 option is a new one to me as well. This came in just this week. From what Tim told me. There is a $4,000 number, which is a dollars out from the airport to a company called Total Environmental Power Systems, which would be to take away anything we wanted taken away. I would suggest probably less digging up the concrete, but pulling anything off the tower, taking the batteries, taking the equipment, so forth and so on. So that may be the source of confusion, is that's one of those numbers. That was $4,000 that we would pay to have someone do that, totally separate from any of the offers from ARQ/Cricket/AT&T to the menu items around different options, different dollars for different things left behind. And I do agree that you do something and then you say out of sight, out of mind, and then the time comes for someone to come in and you've got to say, well, gee, we've got to do some stuff first. However, my hunch might be that the remaining infrastructure of already having the power service, already having the metering, already having the pads, would even serve as an offset to, oh, but you do have to pull down these other guys' old antennas to put your own up. But I like the fact that we have a number for the most that it would cost to have somebody professional come and strip that stuff off the tower. And I kind of think of it as netting out against the $12,000 if indeed that's the money we might bring in.
Chairman Hutter, you reminded me of what kind of sounded like a conflict. I heard that at one point they would take away the cabinets and the batteries, and then I've heard another guy would come in for $4,000 and remove everything that was left, including the batteries. My point is this: if I'm a contractor cleaning up electrical waste units, I may be assigning value to what I'm anticipating is there. And I could imagine him coming in with this verbal stuff, it's not written, and say, whoa, it was $4,000 if I was getting the batteries. We want to avoid that. I'm just asking, right, at some point when we're ready to act on it, I would like to see in writing a chart of what the alternatives are, what they're expecting. We compare them, say, fine, let's do this one. But I would be voting for one that leaves it as clean and ready for the next guy as possible.
Okay, in writing, what we received via email was that Cricket leaves their entire facility and pays $10,000. They'll leave antennas, electrical lines, radio cabinets, basically leaving everything in place. The alternative that was presented by Mr. Cockrell, this was a couple of weeks ago, was that he can have a company come in, pay us the $10,000, and they would remove the cabinets, batteries, antennas, things like that, and have them refurbished, but they don't really want to take a lot of the things with them. But really what he wants are the cabinets and batteries. And today, when I talked to him, he came up with the $12,500 number, saying that they would have this company in Vegas, of which I don't know the name of the company. He's not sharing that information. That they would come in and take the cabinets and batteries. And I've been in contact with Mr. Pacheco, who works for contracts with AT&T, about the $4,000 number. So I will get clarification on this tomorrow from Mr. Cockrell. My thought is if he will pay the $12,500 then and take the cabinet and batteries, that will alleviate some of that headache. But either way, when we pull the batteries, we will have to have them treated as hazardous materials and removed according to EPA standards and OSHA and all that.
Okay, so one way or another, one thing I'd like to maybe point out and frame is we now have somebody who's willing to, A, pay us money, and as part of paying us money, take away the most nefarious of those things as part of that deal. The alternates, and I think you should mention them, Tim, because they're important. There are also options at lower dollar levels where more is taken. And refresh us as to the one that, is it the $5,000 offer where everything except the pads and infrastructure goes away?
Yes, for $5,000, Cricket removes their lines, antennas, radio cabinets. They leave the platform, electrical service, and antenna mounts. And they, of course, give us $5,000 for that.
So the question for the authority, remains, kind of the different, $6,500 to $7,500, $7,500 to take away pretty much everything. But again, the addition that we are paying $7,500 to have removed is not the batteries, it's not the cabinets. That goes at the 12.5 level too. It sounds like cabling, it sounds like antennas. The decision you need to make then is, could you get rid of that stuff another way for less than $7,500? The stuff that, as you said, Member Peterson, I think very correctly, is of value to somebody is going away in both of those deals. But at the same time, that's also the nasty stuff to make go away. My hunch would be that for less than $7,500, we could have somebody come, climb the tower, take the antennas down, and so forth and so on. But I'm not an expert in these things. So I respect the desire to have written offers and to have something that is in front of us saying, as you said, option A, option B, yay or nay. But I'm also hearing that we may have an exploding offer here between now and the time of our next meeting. If that's not the case, then I would favor the idea of having formal offers that we can review and take action on. But I turn to you to tell me if that's not the case. If this is something that's going to require action prior to the next meeting, then we should really consider, at the very least, something that says pending, formal, the manager's receipt of a formal offer that suggests A, B, and C, it is approved, or something to that effect.
As Steve Tagus had said, I think there's a deadline on this decision. So the reason he called today was to find out if we needed any information, and that's when he came up with that 12.5 number. I don't know. I don't know if this explodes, as you say, between now and the next month, or if we have a little bit more time. That I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't see the possibility of having a motion and a vote on something that's not concrete. We're essentially saying, go clean it up and take what looks like a good deal. That makes me very uncomfortable. I don't have a problem with instructing you to go back and say the airport authority is anxious to receive your offer, and if necessary, might convene an ad hoc meeting to address that if there is some urgency. However, they haven't given us a formal notice. They've got 120 days beyond that. I would have to believe that an indication from us that, yes, we'll work with them. We want to get it done up. We want to get it done in a procedural way till we know what we're voting on here. I don't see that as onerous. Just give them assurances, yes, we will entertain their offer and we'll act promptly as soon as we have it in hand. I don't see a problem with it. Secondly, this is a public meeting. They're seeing our discourse, and they would be smart to use this in framing any future revisions to their offer. They've already made one change. I will say that as I hear your description of what the lower price that they're offering us is, it's to take all the cabling out and everything out and leaving us the one thing we might use, which is the pad and the electrical power to it. That's where I would want to go. The difference, the $7,000 difference between that and the 12, which might be regained by selling some of the pieces. We're not a heavily staffed airport. I have to believe there's more productive things that all of us, including you, can do than chase a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 differential, when really we'd like to just have a let stuff gone, check, cash, done, thanks, next. So I don't know if it's time for a motion, but I still believe the correct action is to instruct Mr. Rowe to communicate to them we are interested in working with them. Please frame the offers with great specificity, and we will act either at the next month's meeting or prior if there's a reason, but you could assure them that we will in fact correspond and respond quickly.
Well, in light of, I think that well-framed comment, the $12,500 offer is one that was just lobbed out. We don't have that in writing. I think that it is indeed not prudent to act on something we don't have. I think I would give the instruction indeed to please have Mr. Cockrell rewrite what you have, I know, received in previous communications, the formal offers, to clearly spell out those three choices and give us something that we can act upon, find out very clearly what the time frame is. If it can't tolerate September meeting, then let me know, and we can take action from there. But yeah, I think it's important that we get clarity around what this new option would be, and then we can move forward.
Okay.
Any final comments from the board? Okay. That brings us to action, or item number 4, discussion, and the prior item number 3, discussion and possible action to confirm earlier votes of approval by the authority on January 21, 2015 and February 18, 2015. Council takes.
Just real quick, in looking at the motions and actions taken by Lee Griffin while he was on the airport authority, but after we learned that during that time period he was not employed or associated with the manufacturer, which was a criteria of his appointment, the prudent thing for us to do is the two items on which he was either a motion or a second. I think in both of them he was a second. I think Member Posick was the motion on both. it would be prudent for you simply to confirm those actions taken. The votes were fine. They were unanimous in all instances, so it wasn't like his participation would have changed the outcome. But given the fact that he was a moving or second to the motion, it just makes sense you confirm it. The two actions were the January 21 action, which approved task 4 with Atkins to provide north apron design, which we're underway with, and the other one was a funding issue with the open house. So my recommendation is you simply confirm the actions that were taken on January 21 and February 18th as set forth in the briefing.
Thank you. Any discussion from the board? Questions? Seeing none, I suppose I have to ask for comments or questions from the public on this matter. And seeing none there, we would be in need indeed of a motion.
I move that we confirm the actions taken on January 21st and February 18th as set forth by council.
We have a motion. We need a second.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, motion is made and seconded. Discussion from the board? Any comments or further discussion from members of the public? Seeing none, we stand in need of a vote. All in favor of the motion, I'll say aye. Aye. And all opposed if there be any. The motion passes unanimously. Item number 5, discussion and possible action to approve the request by Cactus Air Force to conduct a World War II Veterans event on the main apron and in the terminal building on August 30th, 2015. We have Mr. Brune, is it, from the Cactus Air Force with us tonight? And please do sign in on your way up.
Anyhow, the flyers were prepared and handed out. It's Rick Clemens wants to invite the community and especially the World War II veterans that are in the local area and throughout the state to attend. And he's going to also have that flight at 12 noon. We've got some World War II memorabilia and some displays that he wanted to personally set out. And that's essentially it.
Well, great. Thank you for.
And then we got that flight at 12 noon.
Okay, that's the TBM Avenger?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and to understand, I know you've talked about this with Mr. Rowe, the use of, well, I guess the use of the airport property aside from the Cactus Air Force hangar is using the terminal building as well, or the apron in front of the terminal building. Is that why we're talking about it tonight, Mr. Rowe?
Yes. What him and I had talked about was for the people that entered the airport that they be escorted, and if they wanted to essentially walk through there and maybe look at the exhibits in there also, and everybody would be escorted. There wouldn't be any freelance, and we would kind of corral the crowd down at the Cactus Air Force during the engine run-ups and make sure that everything was run safely. So it'd be organized.
And Mr. Rowe, any other comments from your side on the proposed event?
I don't have anything. The only thing that I would prefer is that they bring in their own porta potties, because when you get a lot of people using our limited restroom space, it sure makes a mess, and it's a pretty big cleanup. So that would be the only thing that I would request that they do. The rest of the terminal is usually an easy cleanup. I'm debating whether I'm going to be there just to kind of keep track of things, and I probably will be. The only thing I want to do is make sure that nobody's gets into anything that they shouldn't be getting into.
And I would certainly say that you should be there as the representative of the terminal building and the activities going on there, and to just ensure safety and proper procedure. Members of the authority.
I had the pleasure of attending the event they put on last year. I enjoyed it. I think it's very nice of them to do this. It seemed like a good idea.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the authority? Members of the public? I suppose that, I guess, turning to Mr. Rowe, since you put this on the agenda, the action that, and for everybody's sake, this is a little bit new in the sense that we're being a bit more deliberate in looking at events that utilize the airport and utilize the terminal building and the public space, just to make sure that we have understanding of the usage, the safety considerations, if any, the impact and so forth. And that's, I think, why we're perhaps discussing an item like this, which is a little different from some that we've done, or the way that we've handled these things in the past. Is there any consideration or need for insurance coverage, named insured of the airport for things like this, or how is that typically handled, Mr. Rowe?
Well, of course, the airport has its own insurance, which we're covered for events like this inside and outside of the terminal, but it would be wise to ensure that Cactus Air Force has insurance for this event. And I believe you did mention that you did have it. I have hoping that you would at least.
I would verify it.
Yeah, and we would like to have a hold harmless clause on that for the airport.
Okay. Then that leaves us in need of a motion to potentially approve this use of the terminal building and the airport property for this event, and potentially conditioned on the presence of that insurance and the bringing of outhouses, perhaps. But would someone like to make a motion?
I just have a question. All the FBOs carry $2 million worth of insurance that covers the airport for these kind of actions, does it not?
Class 1 FBOs, yes, are required to carry $2 million in liability.
Are they Class 1?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess that would cover that, wouldn't it?
Class 1 has to have $2 million and needs to name the airport and Carson City as additional insured. So assuming that's in place, we should be covered that way.
Okay.
And that's an assumption we have to make as a Class 1 FBO status. I mean, let's not burden this more than necessary. I mean, you're a Class 1 FBO in good standing. So, okay, would anyone like to make that motion?
Okay. I move we approve the request by Cactus Air Force.
So moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Any further comment from the public? We stand in need of a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, if there be any. Hearing none, the motion unanimously carries, and we look forward very much to this celebration, and thank you for bringing it to us.
And thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Tamara.
my computer just crashed, so I can't record. I have to reboot. I just needed a couple of minutes.
So we can all go home?
No, I just have to reboot. I think I'm not getting anything.
Well, this is our 7:30 bio break then, and we will.
Thank you.
We will give Tamara a few minutes to get organized. Thanks for letting me know.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be adjourned until 7:35. Okay, tomorrow are you live again? Excellent. Thanks everyone for the patience. It's 7:35 and we are back in session. Now, I have to remember where we were. That brings us to 6. Item number 6, discussion and possible action to approve the continued use of the terminal by the EAA, Experimental Aircraft Association, to conduct Young Eagles flight operations. And I believe we have Mike Reynolds from the EAA. Thank you. I am looking at one name and I'm seeing another. Please sign in and welcome.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'll make this brief. I am the current president of EAA Chapter 403, which you all know is the best EAA chapter in the state of Nevada, probably California also. In that capacity, we operate the Young Eagles program. Okay, and I'm sure you all have a pretty good grasp of what that program is. We operate out of the terminal, and first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for the use of the terminal. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our airport manager, who really gets involved in this program. Most of the time he's there. He comes to our meetings, and it's not just the EAA, the Young Eagles program. It's the Civil Air Patrol is sitting right behind me, and a whole lot of other activities that happen in that terminal that support the youth of Carson City. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've flown well over 500 youth. And those are your kids that we've flown. And the objective is to motivate and inspire them to pursue a career in aerospace or aviation. As such, we give them scholarships, we send them to the Air Academy, and we try to get them away from video games and other things that could be worse. And I think the program has been very successful. It's national. We're approaching 2 million kids nationally. And we have probably one of the best safety records in all of general aviation. So, first, I'd like to thank you for the use of the terminal. Second, I'd like to ask you for the continued use of the terminal, and even as we plan to expand our Young Eagle program. And thirdly, I'd like to ask you, since this is a great opportunity, how would you feel about donating to the Young Eagles program from the airport board? What are your thoughts on it, Mr. Chair?
Okay, so I guess taking that in pieces. First off, thank you for what you guys do to keep, in fact, that pipeline full of people being interested in flying, especially the little people. And I think that is, when we talk about the long-term sustainability of the airport and of general aviation in this country, is exactly what we need to be doing more of. So, that's very commendable. And I didn't know what the number was until tonight in terms of kids that our chapter has flown here. So thank you for the efforts and for all of the pilots that donate their time and their enthusiasm and their airplanes through that program. I don't believe that, well, I'm speaking for myself, that there is a thought up here, at least in my mind, about not continuing to continue this activity. It's exactly the sort of thing that we would like to have at our airport. I'm not exactly sure what your question is with regard to donations from the airport, so I have to, I guess, beg your pardon on that.
Well, could you at least discuss it before you say no?
You know, we're not noticed. We didn't notice this item on our agenda for action on dispersing any funds, and we're required by law to do that if that was a request. What we are noticed to do is to approve the continued use of the terminal building by the program. And I also want to thank you and tell you, as a pilot who's flown a bunch of Young Eagles, it's just a tremendous joy. It's great. The kids are very appreciative. It's a wonderful thing.
And I'd like to say that because we do donate to the Young Eagles by allowing them to use the terminal, and also we love to allow them and donate space at our open house for them to operate with their programs. So we do donate.
So how can I formally get on the agenda to request funds for that program? Request that now?
I don't know. I haven't done one of these before in the sense of that's an interesting and a nice forward request. I mean, I suppose any item can be agendized. It's sort of an interesting request in that regard. Our budget is approved on an annual basis. Our budget is fixed largely by statute. Increases to our expenditures have to have offsetting items. There is no budget line item for charitable donations. Right now we are trying to save every penny we can to make our matching grants to continue the improvements to the airport so that the Young Eagles have a runway to fly from. So that is a much more involved process than than sort of putting it on the agenda and talking about it. It's really a budgetary question, and our budget cycle works in a very specific way. But I see Mr. Takis with something to clarify.
Yeah, you're on the right track. The best time to approach us is about 7 months from now, which is when we're in the budget process, and that is really the only time the airport authority is really in a position to consider disbursement of funds to charitable organizations, something which candidly doesn't happen very often, but that would be the right time to bring it up.
So there is hope in the future.
There's always hope.
Okay. That's all I have, sir.
Member Peterson.
Just as a comment, before you run away, sir, I doubt there'd be anybody here that isn't a supporter of the EA and the Young Eagles. My personal comment is you're one of many not-for-profit organizations on the airport. And I just consider for a minute what would happen if we begin to try to squeeze room in a very public budget that is running very thin to keep lights on for one charitable operation. There's a big line that's going to form out that door, and it gets to be kind of difficult. Now, on the other hand, if you want to approach any of these other gentlemen on the way out of the building tonight, they may well dig in their pockets and come up something for you. I might be happy to fly some kids around. I've been doing it for the Boy Scouts recently, so that may be your avenue to actually getting some help is on an individual basis.
I understand.
And I will certainly join Member Peterson. Young Eagles is something that I have not participated in as a pilot, but have always wanted to find a way into. And so I think I've met the guy who can help me out with that. So,
I can do that.
We'll be talking on a one-on-one basis. I'll join you there in that. So I think with that question answered for the time being, we are back to the item of business here, which is continued use of the terminal by the EAA for the Young Eagles operations. And are there any other questions? Member White. Member White.
Does this request have an end date?
As far as, are you asking me? As far as operating the Young
Right.
Eagles? As long as we have pilots and a terminal and airplanes, we will continue the program.
Okay. And with that, I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay. I think that you brought up the exact question that I would have, and let me just confirm with Mr. Rowe. We're having this question now just because we're sort of, let's call it housekeeping. But this isn't sort of approval for the next year or the next 6 months, the next 10 years. This is approval until such a time as it were maybe to be revisited.
The Young Eagles has been meeting and flying the kids out of the terminal since before I came, and my understanding they were flying the kids basically since the inception of the airport, probably in that area. So they are the one organization in this country that has flown and introduced more kids to aviation than any other. So I have always supported them. I'm a member, and and we have a good relationship with them. So as long as they're able, like Mike says, to fly the Young Eagles, have pilots to fly them, and a place for them to launch out of, then I would recommend that this carry on in perpetuity.
Thank you. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, we're back to the board and indeed in need of a motion.
I move to approve the request to use the airport terminal by the EAA group.
There's a motion. We need of a second. Was that Member Shirk?
Yes, sir. Second.
Second by Member Shirk. And further discussion from the board? Further comments from the public? Seeing none, we are ready for a vote. All in favor of the motion as presented, say aye. Aye. All opposed if there be any. Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Item number 7, discussion and possible action to approve the Civil Air Patrol to conduct bi-monthly meetings in the terminal. And we have 2 representatives, I suppose, from this Civil Air Patrol tonight. Please
Yes, my name is
sign in.
Paul Thorne.
Mr. Thorne.
And this is Dale Brown. He's the
Evening.
squadron commander of the Douglas County Composite Squadron. We are in the process of trying to form a new Civil Air Patrol squadron here at Carson City Airport. As you may recall, maybe 15 years ago, there was a Carson City Composite Squadron here, and this is an effort to reform that. We have seen a lot of interest in the community here to form a new squadron here. There are several members of both the Douglas County Squadron and the Reno Composite Squadron that would possibly become members here in Carson City. And I'm sure most of you are familiar, at least in part, with the missions that Civil Air Patrol has. I think we'd be a fine asset to the airport. We do also do aerospace education, both for seniors and cadets. We would dearly love to take some of the kids in the 12 to 18 year range that the EAA probably doesn't fly any longer and add those to our program and keep them excited in aviation, or potentially get new kids involved, of course. We also do aerial and ground search and rescue. I think most people around here would be familiar with the Steve Fawcett search, which was largely for the Nevada wing conducted out of the Minden Airport. So we have occasions for that kind of operation too. All we're asking at this point is to be able to use the airport terminal building to conduct our bi-monthly meetings of the what is currently a flight of the Douglas County Squadron. But when we have enough members join up, then we can formally form the Carson City Composite Squadron. We're hoping to do that in the near future.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And a question that, going back to that 15 years ago, so I've been living in Carson City in Reno for 35 years. There was at one point a presence in a physical building. Was there not over on the north side of the taxiway, kind of up by off of Lockheed Way? Was that not one time that little building where the Civil Air Patrol was located?
Quite possibly. Neither one of us, unfortunately, have been around that long in this area. But at some future point, not part of this discussion, yes, we may wish to ask for some space on the airport, both to hangar an airplane, hopefully, and also an office. But that's future. Right now, all we need is the meeting facility in the terminal building.
Sure. It is remembering some history there. Now, by osmosis here, Member Shirk.
Just a quick question. When you have your meetings at the terminal, do you advise Tim of when that is? Is it during the day or the evening or the nighttime?
We would like to meet at 6 p.m. on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month, and we have no problem coordinating that with Tim.
Okay. And I know legally we should probably ask, is there any liability risk to the airport or to Carson City? And if so, do we have the appropriate insurance policy in place?
We did submit to Tim a copy of an insurance binder far in excess of the amount that you asked the FBOs to provide.
Thank you very much.
Member Peterson?
Are the meetings open or private?
They're open.
Any other questions from the authority? Comments from the public? Seeing none, we're back to the authority and in need of a motion.
I move to approve the request by the Civil Air Patrol, and I move to approve the request conditions of proof of insurance and approve the meeting in the terminal building and keeping the city manager, or sorry, the airport manager in the loop of when those meetings will occur.
We have a motion and need a second. Second from Member White, and further discussion from the board. Seeing none, any further comment from the public? Hearing none, we are ready for a vote, and all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously, and we look forward to the Civil Air Patrol and its future at Carson City. I guess it's rekindled future at Carson City.
Absolutely, thanks.
And thank you very much for your services to all of us as pilots. You know, it's good to know that if one of those bad days comes, there's going to be somebody out there looking for our behinds. So
Right. Absolutely, and we represent a great value to the public, because when Washoe County, for instance, fires up their Raven helicopter, you can imagine the costs of that. The Civil Air Patrol, I think the current rate is about $47 an hour plus gas. So for the approximate same service in searching for someone, the public gets a great service.
excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Item number 8, discussion and possible action regarding Nevada Revised Statute 496.080, the sale, lease, or other disposal of municipal airports and related facilities and property. Member White, this is your item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little background on this particular item. For several years now, I have been observing and studying the operations of this airport, and I don't feel like the airport is really in a sustainable position. And one of my primary reasons to get on this board was to start finding out what sort of changes we can make to make this airport more attractive, to get people to come in here and start developing on the airport. And I have noticed that we seem to have a substantial issue with getting people to consider a lease. And so what I'm proposing, perhaps on the surface, does not appear to have a very direct target. And that's simply because I think there are options there that none of us have. As a group, we don't have knowledge that everyone else might have. And so that's why I haven't constructed this with a very pointed direction. I did point out 496.080 in regards to several things, because it appears, as I read the whole, that whole title that deals with aviation in the NRS codes, that other localities, other airports have options that we don't have. There are options out there that properties that are not airport related that they have. And what my real intent is to open a discussion with our assemblyman. If this board has, if they're up to opening that conversation to search for a way to make it easier to lease the properties on our airport. One of the things that I've noticed in statute that requires us for renewal of leases, particularly for FBOs, that has to be done as a public auction. And to be quite honest with you, I would not invest the money into that kind of property if I wasn't assured that I had some lease options going forward. So that's one of the things I'm looking at. Also in RS 844, Section 9, Paragraph 2A, it simply states that we must dispose of property by public auction. And in that regard, what I would propose is just simply changing that to say that we only need to follow NRS codes that are appropriate. And with that, I would ask Council Takis if he has had an opportunity to look at NRS 321, Section 7, and Section 8.
Short answer is yes, I did look at those. I just have to refresh my memory. We talked about them the other day. Which sections were those? 321, what was it?
007, 008.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Chapter 321 addresses public lands, and 321.007 is the definition of the division, which is the division of state lands, and 008 defines state lands that were granted by the federal government to the state of Nevada and held in trust for the state permanent school fund or another beneficiary. And those are not the lands. Carson City Airport doesn't fit in that chapter.
Okay. Where was I going with that? I think considering that one of the things that binds us up is our population according to the census. According to the 2010 census, which Council Takis assures me is our official population, we may well be in the category that substantially restricts us, but the eventuality is today our population puts us below that. And I think if we could have our assemblyman have a discussion with the LCB whether we can get an exemption to these severe restrictions, it might be in our advantage. And I think one of the reasons I bring this forward now is that the interim committees are being met now with the legislature, and I think our assemblyman would have an opportunity to meet with those folks and have a discussion whether he might be able to bring a favorable view of whatever it is we might want to try to do here. So again, at this point, it's merely kind of a conceptual idea as to, do we want to try to make things easier on the airport to lease properties? One of the other ideas is if we can go out and market this in such a manner that, such as Mr. Uhart presented here tonight, do we really need to go to public auction if we have somebody standing in front of us ready to pay what an appropriate appraisal says to pay?
So just to frame that up then a second, it sounds like, and I think it's an important question is to put scope on this, that the question or the aspect of this that you're really most interested in addressing is the public auction piece, okay? Because, making the process more streamlined, making the process easier is, I think, where you're headed,
Right.
as opposed to any sort of scenario that points toward trying to get past a lease at appraised value, which would be a whole different subject.
Right.
Okay, so the idea being is to say, right now, you've got someone who we were asking to pay for an appraisal, several $1,000s perhaps, to have a crack at leasing something, but that where they could be vested in the public auction process. And perhaps looking at some of the the details of the statute, saying that if indeed we were below 55,000, or maybe you're also proposing this statute were changed, we might find some liberalization in that practice.
Right.
Okay.
And indeed, if we have several people standing in front of us that are interested in a particular piece of property, obviously, that may well be a reason to go to public auction. We could make more money above what the appraisal says. But history has shown us that we're having trouble getting that done. Another point I did want to make is perhaps our appraisals are not being done appropriately, and we may find some relief in that manner as well. I think if the assemblyman has these discussions with the LCB, they may well be aware of some things that we simply aren't.
Okay. Member Peterson?
Steve, this might be addressed to you, but my memory's failing me. I don't recall an auction process. When there was some activity in the market in the past, I do recall that we had established a minimum lease rate, which was moved up and down at various times, and that if somebody came forward, and I recall several doing, saying, I'm interested in thus and so parcel, we said, fine, get an appraisal. Okay, it's above our minimum lease rate. It's yours. I don't recall an auction as being a part of this process. What have I missed?
And it just might be memory, because the process that's required by statute by NRS 244, which is the same process for our airport, Carson City, all of the counties in the state, all the cities in the state, is that before you can lease your property, you first have to get an appraisal. You have to determine what the fair market value is. And the logic for that is you shouldn't be giving away, you guys are in a position of public trust, you shouldn't be giving away the city or the airport's property. So the first step is an appraisal. Then the next step is you set a date on which people submit sealed bids. And you open the bids on that day, and it doesn't have to be real far out, particularly if you have interest. You could make it relatively short if you've got people who are chomping at the bit. And then you open the sealed bids. If there's more than one bidder for the property, then it's an auction. You let them bid against each other and you bid it up. If there's only one offer, it's probably going to run a lot more like you just described a minute ago. You get the offer, great, this is the only offer we've got, it meets our minimum requirements, boom, let's lease the land. Bigger issue that we have right now is there may not be people clamoring to want to lease the land to build hangars because we have vacant hangars on our airport, which 10, 15 years ago, there were waiting lines for hangars. But now we have vacant hangars. And so we haven't seen, parade of developers coming to us saying, hey, I really want to build a hangar development on your airport. We do occasionally see the onesie twosies, some guy who wants to build his own little Taj Mahal or, mobile home or whatever level of a hangar he wants to build, but we have not seen the developer approach, which we have had in the past. And so that may be one reason we're not seeing it. The other reason, I think Member White is right, we're not effectively marketing our airport. We have a phenomenal facility, but there's no one here on staff, and I'm speaking for myself, Jim, and Tim, that have marketing experience. And so you're not seeing the marketing. So I'm getting off field, but I think I explained to you the process. Sorry.
Actually, in a way, you led to my real point. And Member White, we would all like to see the airport prosper in several ways. That we would agree on that. But my memory of past events and of observing since then is not that the auction process was an impediment. That it can look like it won, and sure enough, as Mr. Tagus said, if we had a line wanting one piece of property, but if they did, we would say, hey, there's a bunch more land out there, let's get busy and do that, and we'd be busy signing leases. What I'm seeing right now is there is a market limitation. There's a lack of interest, but I don't really see it being the auction process. And if we're going to focus our energies on something to improve the activity and the interest at the airport, I don't know that this one's going to change anything. But I'm open to what might. I mean, I'm not saying let's back away from making it a better deal.
And I'm certainly cognizant of the obstacles that we face at the legislature. And myself, I'm willing to put the time and effort into it. I don't see it costing the airport authority any money for lobbying or anything of that nature. I feel like everybody sitting on this board should be willing to take those kind of things on and see if we can move this airport forward. And I do realize this may come to nothing.
Now, I'm reading my copy of NRS 496080, and I want to make sure I am seeing something right here because it's a little confusing as I'm now reading it yet again. It says, a board of county commissioners of a county, or a board like ourselves, of a county whose population is 55,000 or more. The last census we have says that we're over 55,000. If a population is 55,000 or more, it may rent or lease or renew the rental of a lease, et cetera, for a storage hangar without conducting a public auction. So it sounds to me from reading this that the statute as written favors what you're saying.
Indeed, at that level of a structure, it does. I'm thinking more on the level of an FBO, an actual business, an operation, a manufacturer on the airport.
Okay, so that is important
Right.
clarification.
That's
It's
what I'm
not
looking for.
that the statute is written reference 55,000, no public auction is the issue. It's the storage hangar limitation to that exemption as opposed to any lease.
Right.
Like an FBO or manufacturer lease. So to understand, the thesis is, Member White, that might the airport in some way advocate for an amendment to or change to the statute that would allow us to conduct lease activity around non-storage hangar only, or FBO leases, without a public auction. And the question then is, I mean, I don't know an awful lot about local level advocacy, but or state level advocacy, but you know, these things, I guess, from my knowledge, don't happen for free, and they actually take an awful lot of effort. This is a statewide initiative, and it wouldn't sort of, I think, you know, I don't want to be naive and think that, you know, if Carson City raises its hand and says, hey, we're really intent on this being changed because we've got a very good case, provided we have a very good case to present that this is harming our economic development, there's still all the rest of Nevada. So this now means a coalition of airports. You know, and where I'm going with this is suddenly we're getting a lot more complicated. So now it's talking about a statewide lobbying effort, and I just don't understand how we can do that for free.
Well, ideally, we would never get to that point. I will say that I have been through my third session at the legislature as a registered lobbyist. I have been fairly successful in what I've done, and it has been all pro bono, simply on issues that I felt necessary to have a public voice on.
Well, so there's the practicality of this approach, but I think more fundamentally, there's a question for this authority, which is, I'll turn to Vice Chairman Peterson's comment earlier, you know, a limited number of hours and dollars, and what is the most effective way to deploy them? Because I think, again, to support where your bigger picture comment is, yes, what can we do, if anything, to jumpstart, to the economic development and new tenants and valuable revenue and what have you, activity at the airport. I think the question is, what is the major driver, or the major hindrance to that? Yes, this is one element. But again, I'm not really sure where the anecdotal or the empirical, I should say, evidence is that this is the thing holding us up versus, let's say, okay, get rid of the auction process. At the price that Carson City Airport land is valued at, are there takers? Even if that were, 80% of that by some magic, are there takers? I know that one of the thoughts or the comments that's been put out is, well, look what's going on down at Minden. That's looking a lot more robust, or a little more robust. But I think it's important that if we're making comparisons between activity at Minden Tahoe and activity at Carson City, we understand what the drivers are. So I kind of look at this in two categories. When we talk about marketing the airport or looking at this kind of attractiveness. So we have our transient population, and the transient population and that activity is going to largely be driven by some attraction, a low fuel price, a good restaurant, the attractions in the local area, a draw of some sort. And those attractions, the ones that are meaningful to pilots, I think have a lot to do with, stuff that's right near the airport. But at the end of the day, that's not going to be stuff we drive directly. Right. It's going to be what our tenants drive. It's going to be El Aero / Mountain West going forward with an attractive fuel price that they're going to market, or a restaurant that they or somebody else opens and what have you. Then there's our based tenants, okay, and the revenue base that comes from folks having airplanes at Carson City. Now that's something that in one sense we have a more direct impact on, and our responsibility is to market. But what are the drivers there? The drivers there are, do we have the kind of approaches and facilities that attract the kind of tenant operators we're looking for? And obviously, without commenting on that one way or the other, yes, bigger things that have more tax revenue and drink more gas have more finicky demands, like straight-in approaches that are CAT C and D night certified. We have a lot of those things in place now, and we're getting better. We've got a longer, nicer runway. We've got a TAF, a terminal forecast, and we're making headway on our approaches. So there are things we're doing there, but there are things that are and aren't under our control. So I guess, we just, maybe this ties to Mr. Takis's comment about marketing or market analysis. Yeah, we don't have the innate kind of expertise on staff, and maybe there's some things to explore there. But I think we have to really understand what the levers are so that we can have a really good concerted effort at using our limited resources to pursue the most meaningful approaches. And I don't know what the evidence is that says this is the thing, I guess is my comment.
Well, I think the evidence that we haven't signed a new lease in quite a long time should be pretty strong enough that there's something wrong on the airport. This may not be the silver bullet, but at least in my mind, it certainly is one of the components, and so I think we should address it. We may not indeed have an entire game plan in place, but I think it's somewhere to start and see what the flavor is going forward.
So the proposal would theoretically be that the airport authority would or would not get behind the idea of launching an advocacy effort to change NRS 496-080?
I don't think, excuse me, but we're not noticed to take that kind of action.
Oh, no, and let me be clear. I'm not suggesting or making a motion. I'm just trying to understand from Member White's sort of, and the action item arising from this, whether agendized or not, would be, just trying to understand where you would shape this in terms of driving something forward.
Well, I certainly would not want to pigeonhole ourselves strictly to 496-090, or 496-080. I think it would be strictly to approach our assemblyman with this basic idea of how do we find relief on the lease renewal and some of the population restrictions. And if he could have a conversation with the LBC, see what the possibilities lay there, come back to us, let us know what that is, and then we can move forward from there. If LCB see that there's no opportunity or way to wiggle around on this, then there's no sense in going any further beyond a conversation with the Legislative Council Bureau.
Member Shirk?
Well, if I understand this correctly, I see your point of view and I hear what you're saying, Mr. White, also. But at this juncture, could you just not, on your own, talk to our assemblyman and have a discussion with him, see where that could take us, if he could talk to the LBC, and then come back to us and say, this is what I've learned, here's a path we could take or a course we could take, however you want to put that, and then take it to the next step? I don't think we need board approval or you don't need our approval to do that on your own.
I can assure you that Assemblyman O'Neill will not go forward with this unless there is an agreement amongst the board that this is what we want to look at.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. And that's from, if I may, that's from a previous discussion you had with him. That's how you came to this juncture to come to the airport authority and bring it up.
Based on activities during the last legislature, yes.
Okay. So then let me ask, in this agenda item, we don't have a proposal we can't make a proposal. Is that correct?
That's correct. If the idea was to come before the authority and ask for an authority vote to go to LCB or to go to Assemblyman O'Neill or something, we should have put that in the description. And if you had communicated that to me, I apologize, I didn't understand that at any stage.
And then just to follow up, one more quick thing. So then if Mr. White came back to you, asked for an agenda item in that proposal that we did, or as we're discussing here, then it could be an agenda item where we could make a proposal, get a second and vote on it. That's what we need to do it as of today, correct?
That is correct.
Is that something you would be interested in doing? Yes. Okay, so I think what we have done is learned some things about a direction that may have some relevance in our economic development. We've explored NRS 496-080 in some depth and a couple of other statutes that turned out not to necessarily be relevant. And Member White will update or propose a new agenda item for our September meeting that may carry us forward in pursuing one direction or another. At this time, then, there will be no action to take on this. I have a red light. Member Peterson.
I'm hesitant to get into this. Steve, when was I on the board last? 4 or 5 years ago?
At least.
Yeah. Back then, we had the same urgent concerns, and I kind of led a conversation at the time about what can we do with this wonderful center triangle, and let's make it pretty and market it and go talk to things.
And Chairman Williams kept that going.
Well, I didn't know that, because when I walked out the door to my last meeting, I never came back for 4 or 5 years. But I felt a little guilty at the time, because I'm a firm believer in any organization, somebody takes it on as the champion and ramrods it to the end. It's for me to, at that time, have launched it and said, that'd be a good idea. And really wasn't very kind, I guess, to Chairman Williams, but I'm glad to hear that he kept the energy alive. Where I sit today, and I've lived in some towns that had big boom markets. I've lived in places where there was a real collapse. One thing I've learned is if you've got office buildings downtown with 20% occupancy, nobody's building any new ones. Now, whatever the market forces are, and they ebb and they flow. They come and we have recessions and we get booming again, and here we go. But the bottom line is, if you're a potential investor, you got some money, you like airplanes, you have a business activity that would go well in the airport, and you come down and you go, what's it going to cost me to lease land? What's it going to cost to put a building out there to get the infrastructure going? And you add all that up and say, wait a minute, we've got hangars out here empty that were never empty. I used to have to wait. I was on a 7-year waiting list at one time at an airport. Next time I checked, it was at a 9-year list. They were bumping people ahead of me. It's another problem. So here we are, and there's some big hangars. There's a lot of square footage that is unfilled with aircraft at our airport. I have an opinion, I don't want to get lost in it, about what is the flow of aviation activity in our country, and it breaks my heart to think that it's in decline. I suspect it is. But that doesn't mean we can't steal market. That doesn't mean we can't do a better job. I think we don't just walk up and surrender. But right now, and I think you're the one that used the term silver bullet, if I'm looking at it, I don't see the regulations as a silver bullet. I see the economic status of our world, the decline of aviation, or maybe the maturation into a different form as being a bigger factor. Now, why did I want to get into this? Because if we are to do anything, somebody's got to ramrod it, and I'm not sure I'm raising my hand right now to do that, but I'm interested, and it may be outside of the open meeting. You and I can go out and sit and have lunch and talk about this. I am interested, but somebody's going to have to put the spark plug into it. Maybe it is us. Maybe it is you and I don't know. We'll have to think about that, but the real question is, where do we point the gun to fire that silver bullet? I don't think it's this one. Where do we go find the guys with the money and convince them they should build here? If we had that, then I'd raise my hand and say, now let's go find the next 6 obstacles and knock them down. But until we have buyers, I think we're moving the deck chairs around, as they say.
In that regard, in my view, I think we are on the verge of having people interested.
Good.
And even before an interest is shown, I'd like to remove some obstacles.
Well, I will note, because I think it's the right time, that Member White had another proposed agenda item for this meeting that I had to, and I hope Member White understands where I was coming from, bump in the interest of time and shaping, which really picks up on the spirit of what now I understand, Vice Chair Peterson, you talked about sometime back on your last tour of duty, and Member Williams, Chairman Williams, continued with the center triangle, and Member White has shown some real enthusiasm around, which is the very important question that I fully support, which is, what do we do? How do we be thoughtful, intentional, and smart about the future economic development, taking into account all these realities, regulatory, market, what have you? And this needs some good heads, and as you said, some real energy around it. So in a way, this is all timely, and I think we should have an appropriate group of folks talk about this and get together, start figuring out the right way to approach this. And I would suggest engaging current tenants on the field who know a thing or two about the current environment and have businesses and would be very critical in furthering that marketing effort. So to the extent that I'm hearing enthusiasm and volunteerism, between now and the time we need to set an agenda for next meeting, hopefully we can move that ball forward. And, I think it'll be some time before there's action on the part of the authority on this, other than to say that we should have a continuing discussion. That was a good thing to have standing on the agenda to present updates, but I think the meaningful next step is to put together that nucleus of folks that within the open meeting law regulations and the flexibility we have as an authority or authority members plus staff members plus community members, tenants, what have you, see if we can't put together a working group that can put shape to this and continue to update this authority and get us to a place where we are able to talk about action. So let's see what we can do. I take that as volunteerism. The only thing worse you can do is not show up at the meeting. Then you really get volunteered. So thank you very much. I mean, I think then you get elected. This is really important stuff, and I genuinely think we need to put the right heads with the right time and know-how around this. So we will keep going after Mr. Shirk. I'm being trained here. See, we've got these little lights that the Board of Soups use to say, hi, I've got something to say, and we're used to just looking around and someone putting their hand up, but Jim's training us well. So, Member Shirk.
I know the chairperson will be calling for public input, and while the public, if they do come to the podium, maybe, if I may ask legal counsel a question, and you can come back to us after public discussion. It says on item 8, discussion of possible action, which says on other agenda items as well. So at this juncture, if I'm understanding everything correct, and as I said, we can come back to this, Mr. White could make a motion under this agenda item. That's the way I read this. But we'll do public comment first, if that's all right.
You asking for a response now or after public?
I'm going back to the chairperson.
We'll let the Jeopardy music play from Mr. Takis, and let me ask, are there any public comments at this time on this matter? Or better yet, great ideas and volunteers? Hearing none, I guess we need Mr. Takis' answer.
Yeah, we did put down discussion of possible action, but I don't think you can read into that language an authorization to go lobby for changes in laws. Frankly, I didn't know what the action was that was being proposed, and actually I didn't draft this language, so my apology a little bit earlier was probably unnecessary. This is the language that I was given. What I tried to do is brief everything I could to you about the cited statute, and honestly, I didn't know what action was being proposed. And if I don't know, I think it's fair to say there are probably members of the general public that don't know, and that's when you're in that situation, the open meeting law pretty much says you probably can't take any action.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification because that's what's written in the other agenda items as well. So thank you for that clarification.
Member White?
And actually, I'm good with the discussion and basic direction that we have received tonight. And yes, I did open my remarks with saying this was not a pointed proposal and needed to be crafted. And I think we came to the conclusion that some crafting is appropriate, and we'll bring it back next month. And I'm sure Member Peterson and I can get that accomplished before next month.
Thank you, sir. Well, thank you for that, and I'm glad that that's how you see it, Member White and Member Shirk. Thank you for that point out, because I had my eyeball on it, and that clarification is important. I think as Member White just said, and I would agree, we got what I think was the intent here, which was to have some spirited conversation on this and to set some wheels in motion. And I'll look forward to bringing back hopefully some updates in a month. Let's move on then to item number 9, presentation of the 20-year pavement maintenance program for the Carson City Airport. Mr. Clegg.
Thank you. Yeah, I put this pavement maintenance program together because most of the pavements on the airport have been recently constructed, but to keep them in good shape, we need to have a pavement maintenance program. Now, the FAA grant assurances require that we have one in place, but all they require is that a pavement condition index be developed. Fortunately, NDOT Aviation gets grants from the FAA, and they do this every 3 to 4 years. They go around to all the general aviation airports, and they develop the PCIs for the pavements, the airfield pavements on the airports. So I gave you the information on how to look at the Carson City Airport. When they did the evaluation on the airport, phase 3 of the main apron hadn't been completed, so it's really not up to date as to what we've accomplished. But essentially, with the exception of the north apron, all the airfield pavements on the airport have a PCI of 70 or greater. And what that essentially means is if the pavement has a PCI of 70 or higher, the only action that you really should consider is pavement maintenance, just to prolong the life of the pavement. So, with that, there's various methods of pavement maintenance, and essentially what it boils down to is you want to go out there and seal all the cracks. In our case, we have socket control joints. Just need to reseal those, spray down some kind of seal coat, and then stripe the pavement. And it'll prolong the life. Now, the only thing that really changes there is the different kinds of sealers that you would use. You could do a fog seal that doesn't have a very long life, but it's cheap. There's also GSB 88, which we used on the runway, and I think that you can tell from the runway it really looks nice. That GSB 88 tends to last anywhere from 5 years or more. I personally looked at it as a 5-year product. There's other sealers like Rain Guard or Overcoat. They're really different, and I don't recommend using them. I've used them on aprons, but you can't use them on high-speed surfaces like a runway. They get too slick when they get wet. Plus, if you ever decided to do something else, like spray a fog seal or something like that, you'd have to go grind it out. And it's really, once you start using it, you have to keep using it. So they're really good for driveways and parking lots. But other than that, I wouldn't want to use them. I really like slurry seals. They last a long time, but there's a maintenance problem there where you got to sweep them all the time to get the little rocks off the surface, and especially at an airport, you know, because in fact, we did a slurry seal here many years ago on the runway, and we got a lot of complaints because it was sandblasting the paint off the fuselage of the airplanes. So anyway, on taxiways and aprons, slurry seals are great, but you do have to sweep it all the time. So anyway, in any case, over the years I've used all these different methods. I've found GSB 88 is probably as good as any, in the results with the longevity and just satisfaction from the airport, that's the way I leaned towards on this pavement maintenance program. Like I said, I considered it to have a life of 5 years, but you know, if you go out there and you see that it's still working, certainly it doesn't need to be done every 5 years, maybe 6 years, 7 years. It's just depends on the usage that it gets. So, but the thing is it's not going to be the cure-all. Eventually, the pavement loses its life and the structural integrity, and you need some kind of a major repair, such as reconstruction of the entire pavement. You can see that now on the north apron. I mean, you know, it's gone. So it needs to be reconstructed. But fortunately, most of the new pavements that we've done on the airport, there's 4 inches of asphalt. So what we would do, the grades are great. Elevations are, everything's good out there. So because we have 4 inches of pavement, you grind 2 inches, and then you do an overlay. And so you keep the same grades, same elevations, and essentially you get 15 more years of life out of that pavement. So that's the way I approached this. Any pavements that were constructed since 2009 would receive mill and fills, and then older pavements would be completely reconstructed. So we put together an exhibit showing the various locations of the pavements and then a schedule. And it's really a conceptual schedule, and that's why I don't have this down as a discussion and possible action. The dates for these can change easily because of FAA funding. They might just say, we can't do it this year, move it another year. So this is a moving target kind of thing, but the idea here is to start establishing somewhat of a budget for pavement maintenance at the Carson City Airport. So the initial years, we're not actually doing pavement maintenance in 5-year cycles in the initial years because of how the ACIP is set up right now. There's higher priorities than pavement maintenance, and that is reconstruction of the north apron. There's other priorities like the master plan, things like that that are going to eat up the budget. So I had to push out the start of the pavement maintenance for these various areas to logical years where we could fit them in. So, I mean, we can discuss this if you want, but I just wanted to present this, give you an idea of what we're thinking. I've incorporated the same years and the dollar figures into the ACIP just to get some kind of marriage between our capital improvement program and how we can get funding from the FAA to do pavement maintenance. So with that, any questions on that?
Okay. So first of all, I think you answered what was going to be my key question, which is, have, to the extent that there are new items generated by your pavement maintenance program analysis, have those been incorporated into the ACIP? Yes. In all cases where you reference the term seal coat, do you mean GSB 88? Or
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the pricing reflects that?
That is correct.
I just wanted to open up by commenting that I really, appreciate the approach that you took here in looking at these things in 2014 dollars with a placeholder for 3% increase per year that lets us now kind of take a hack and then play the game of pushing those things left and right on the calendar, as may be the case, to really start looking at how it programs out year after year. So, I mean, just to comment, just as a start, a nice approach, and I think it gives us a well-presented artifact for talking about those things. So I think a really good achievement on what's been, I know, a short time frame. So excellent. Member White.
Thank you. 2018, the West Perimeter Road. On the calendar maintenance schedule, you refer to that as a reconstruction. On the ACIP spreadsheet, it's referred to as rehabilitate. Interchangeable terminology?
Yeah.
Are we on?
Basically,
okay.
It's interchangeable.
Okay.
I mean, the plan for the perimeter road is the area between the main apron and the bridge, or whatever you want to call it, that goes over the drainage channel. That that whole area would be reconstructed, and then the perimeter road beyond that, all the way up to the north apron, would receive an overlay. So rehabilitation is probably a better terminology than reconstruction.
And considering your definition of reconstruction on the calendar laid out there, it talks about, completely removing the asphalt, aggregate, and the rebuild.
Well, if we don't address the perimeter road pretty soon, the whole thing needs to be reconstructed.
Well, so would it be appropriate to insert rehabilitation on the calendar?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
we can do that.
And for clarity, just to note that in years on the pavement maintenance schedule where reconstruction activity is called for, there are no dollars incorporated there because those aren't maintenance activities. Those are ACIP construction activities.
That's
so just to
correct.
make sure I'm reading it right, in no case are any dollars reflected when I see reconst in the,
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions, you'd mentioned that we're in fine shape with everything constructed since 2009. Which airfield pavements, so not talking about the terminal parking lot, which airfield pavements are not captured by that yet? West Perimeter Road and North Apron, of course. How about up on the north side? I guess some of the taxiways BC.
Yeah, taxiway Bravo's not really very good. We tried to prolong its life just by doing a slurry seal. There's been some complaints, especially from the airport manager. But all in all, I mean, slurry seals are great, but they just don't really go well with pilots. Let's put it that way. And just because it does take a lot of sweeping to get those aggregates from being loose. But once it gets stable, it keeps its surface for quite a while. In any case, Bravo, I tried to find a history on when it got constructed, and I could not pin it down. But it's, I think, over 20 years old. Portions of it might even be 30 years old. So at one time it got widened. You can see that out there. The widened portion isn't quite as old, but I believe the main body of taxiway Bravo is over 30 years old. So, it's held up well, but it's not going to last.
Well, for the forensics that I can contribute, I moved here when I was 3. That was 35 years ago. And let's give it a couple years after that. So 33 years ago, I remember playing out there and it was all dirt. So, maybe right around 30 years, in one fashion or another. But we used to call them unofficially runways, and I know that they were dirt. So, yeah, the point is some of that's getting pretty old.
Yeah.
Are there questions on that pavement maintenance plan? Other questions from our authority members?
I have a question.
Member Stutz.
A great deal of the cost of pavement maintenance is related to the cost of oil, isn't it?
Sure.
Okay. So these figures that you have down the line here, like in 2018 on taxiways Delta, are you basing that based on the cost of the materials as they would be now?
How I developed the cost was I determined what the cost would be in 2014 dollars to do that project. Okay, and then what I did from that, for instance, take runway 927. If we did that project in 2014, the engineering, construction, everything would cost approximately $173,000. Okay, and then if you project that out at 3% per year, the cost in 2020 would be $207,000. Okay, and so that's how I developed the cost per year for each of these different projects. Because I know the 2014 cost of the materials, but future costs, who knows? You know, so increasing by 3% historically has been safe. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. Further questions? Questions or comments from the public? Okay, hearing none. This is not an action item, so there will be no motion. Thank you, Mr. Clegg, for a nice presentation on that and for integrating that into the ACIP, which, surprise, surprise, is our next item, number 10, discussion and possible action to identify FAA-funded projects for 2016 and an update of the ACIP for fiscal years 2017 through 2021. And so our action tonight is going to need to be officially approving the ACIP for that entire span.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Clegg.
Okay, so what I handed out was our proposed 2016 projects and the 2017 through 2021 ACIP. I also handed out last year's spreadsheet for comparison purposes. So last year, we planned on doing the construction of the North Apron in 2 separate phases in 2 separate years. And we decided that Tim had talked to the manager of the airport district's office, and apparently he suggested that we pursue the entire amount of the cost for the North Apron in 1 year. So that's why 2016 now shows the construction of the entire North Apron. I mean, we would still phase the construction, but the funding wouldn't be phased. It would all come in 2016, provided that we can come up with the local share of approximately $200,000. Then from there on, you know, I just took projects from last year's ACIP and just updated the cost to make sure that the estimated cost was still valid. But then we also added projects in there that reflect the pavement maintenance program to make sure that we've got that budgeted in the ACIP somewhere along the line. So the big change from last year's to this year's is to obtain all the funding for the North Apron in 2016 rather than 2 separate years. We also changed the 2021 projects where in last year's ACIP, we showed acquiring the SERPA property that's to the east of Taxiway Bravo, but that's been purchased by someone else. So we decided to go ahead and try to acquire the remaining SERPA property that happens to be to the north of Taxiway Delta. And then a suggestion was made that we should have East Perimeter Road, so that we've got a paved access road that goes around the east side of the airport, which is a good idea, so we added that in. Like I've explained before, the FAA takes serious note of our first 2 to 3 years, and then after that, it's all kind of wish list. And so what we're proposing in 2017, last year we really pushed for obstruction lights, and they agreed that we could get funding for obstruction lights, but I left it on there, but recently we're finding out that there's really no need to even do it, except that, it'd be a good safety item, but there's no reason to spend money on it necessarily. And I'll leave that up to Tim to make that decision. But because the FAA offered to fund that, I left it on the ACIP. Then we have the airport master plan update for 2017, those 2 projects. 2018, I've got seal coat and striping of taxiway Alpha and Delta, and then rehabilitate that perimeter road. And it may be that the FAA will come back and say, we can't fund both. In that same year, you'll have to push one of them off. And so that'll change that pavement maintenance program. And, that's why I didn't ask for an action item on that. 2019, we show a replacement of the automatic gates, do the perimeter fencing. Any wire fence would get replaced with chain link fence. And then theoretically, it's time to seal coat and stripe the main apron so that we can preserve that pavement. But then, like I said before, it would still be a visual inspection. If it doesn't need it, we'll certainly push that back another year. But then again, if we see in another year or 2 that something needs to be done, we'll move it up. So then in 2020, it'll be 5 years. Well, actually, a little longer than 5 years since we last seal coated and striped the runway. So I've got that in there. And then it's time to do some pavement maintenance on taxiway Bravo Charlie, the taxi lanes, and the north access road. And then, like I said before, 2021 is essentially a wish list, except for the north apron seal coat and stripe. If we indeed do the reconstruction of the north apron in 2016, it'll be 5 years later. It's time for pavement maintenance. So that's a real project if the north apron does indeed get reconstructed in 2016. The rest of it is, like I said, wish list items. And if you have a wish list and want to add to this, we'll throw it into 2021. I mean, it's good to keep them in there so that we don't forget about them, really. So anyway, that is the ACIP that we're proposing. And so any questions on that? Comments?
Okay. Well, we've got two pieces to this. One being the 2016, not necessarily saying we have to split this in 2, but our 2016 grant. Now we're in that process. Grant award is estimated when? For the 2016, if that were to come all as one piece, we would get that news when?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Timing
Oh,
on
the
when we would
timing?
get the news on the 2016?
Well, theoretically, the FAA is trying to get grants out as early as June.
Okay.
But
the reason...
the reality is they typically come in late July or August.
Right. So the reason I asked the question, I know that we have talked about this in various fashions in kind of pieces. As we looked at kind of the strategy for applying for the grant, consolidating the two phases of construction, recognizing that based on the timing of grant award, practically speaking, due to either timing and weather or the reality of phasing for access, that this will potentially end up, to be simple about it, spanning 2 summers anyway, or 2 different years. Yeah. The reason I bring it up is I want to ask the question as to, under the terms under which we accept the grant, and the requirement for us to have whatever the test is for money in hand, a clear projection that we will have our share. My question is, would we have a different test with it combined, saying that we have to have the full $197,500 by a certain date that now ties to grant award, and if we could not make that happen within one fiscal year's budget, would we lose the ability to capture this, or would they recognize that the monies won't be expended necessarily all in one fiscal year? So would we have the opportunity to show forward-looking financials that project that we have, for lack of a better word, 50% of it here in this fiscal year and 50% of it next fiscal year? I mean, are they amenable to that, or is there some rigorous test that has to, that says we have to show that we have it all at the outset?
I don't know. That's my honest answer, but I believe that they would recognize that there's going to be a time process here, that you might not have that amount of money right now, but within a 6-month time span, you could accumulate it, that they would recognize that. But that's a question that needs to be made to the manager of the ADO.
And does having that, just given where we are in the process right now, does having that question not answered present any challenges to approval of this as our 2016 project, or slate of projects? Or does that commitment, if I recall from previous cycles, kind of comes a little further down the road? I mean, it really ties more to the grant acceptance point versus the sort of action we'd be taking here tonight. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, because what's going to happen once we get direction from the airport authority that, let's say you vote and you say this is acceptable. What we're going to do in November, December timeframe, we have an annual meeting with the FAA and we present this to them. And then they'll tell us to move certain projects around just because of their limited funding. Not that they're not willing to do it, they just might not have the funds to do it. So that's typically what happens. So in other words, the approval of this tonight isn't necessarily going to be what this ends up being.
Now, thanks for that clarification. I mean, there are various stages in this process, and I think most of us have been through this at least one cycle, if not more. So it's just a refresher. So whether with regard to the 16 project or the slate of on-year projects, to the authority for questions for Mr. Clegg or comments about this slate and any suggestions. Are there any comments from the public about this item? Seeing none, then we would be returned to the board for a motion with regard to action on this slate of projects for the 2016 season and the 2017 through 2021 ACIP.
I move we approve the identification of FAA-funded projects for 2016 and the updated ACIP for fiscal years 2017 to 2021.
We have a motion from Member Stotts. In need of a second. Second from Member White. Oh, sorry, Member Shirk.
Look this way.
Yes, I'm looking at my lights. And back to the board for any further comments or discussion. Any public comment on this motion or item? Okay, then it is back to the authority for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. 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 All opposed, if there be any. Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. And thank you, Mr. Clegg. This concludes our public hearings and action items for the evening. We'll go right into item G, the airport engineer's report, if there is anything further aside from the items we've already discussed.
The only additional item is that we're moving forward with the design of the north apron. And right now it's very preliminary, but we've gotten the geotech investigation done and we've gotten some surveying done. So that's the status.
So that's what the little drilling activity we saw out there was. It's not the new revenue source, the oil under the airport, right?
No.
Yeah, the fracking.
Unfortunately, there's no oil in the asphalt.
That's how light we are. Well, thank you, Jim. And I'm glad to hear it's going well. And we'll look forward to updates on that and hopefully no surprises. Tim, for the airport manager's report, item H.
Just to make it real quick, Steve Takis and I cooperated on a request for a proposal for security services. And Steve suggested all we really needed was to request quotes from various security companies. And because the quotes we were confident would come in at less than $25,000 per year for the services. So I submitted RFPs to firms in Carson, Reno, Sparks area, 6 in all that I could find, and posted it on the website. So we are going to we've asked these companies to submit their RFPs to me by September 9th. They will be reviewed and brought to the authority during the September 16th meeting with recommendations and for discussion and approval or disapproval. It's been 5 years since our current security company is brought on board, and so we are seeking bids for those for another 5-year period. This would be very beneficial for the airport to limit these services for approximately 5 years. I did go on the recommendation of the board to the Sheriff's Department, and they led me down very nicely and thought that if they were able to provide any services, patrols and so on and so forth, it would be very sporadic, and they would not be able to provide the services that we are currently getting and we hope to get from a new security company. And like I said, we expect this to be presented to the board at the next meeting. And that's all I have. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Tim. Questions for Mr. Rowe?
Yeah, I have one.
Mr. Posick.
I guess this means if we're going to do a request for proposal for outside services, does this mean that any other future outside services are going to require this same item to be required before we get any other contractors on the airport?
That's my thought, that if we have another contractor, which we don't have really, that yes, we would require a limit I would say 5 years is a maximum. It has been suggested by Member Shirk that perhaps a 3-year limitation on those services. I will leave that up to the authority.
Okay. I had one question because the information came from Mr. Rowe, although it may be more of a treasurer's question. I have a set of financial statements, income statement and balance sheet. Who generated or provided those? Was that new member White or was that Tim?
Tim.
Okay, Tim. My question is, just so I'm clear on what I'm seeing in these materials. I see a print date of 8/11/15 and on an accrual basis here with a heading that says July 2015 through June 2016. Now, is that reference the fiscal year? But the headers all say that. So is it numbers to date, or is anything I'm looking at here intended to be a projection?
No, that's only numbers to date. That was actually a minor mistake of mine. I generally will limit it to the last month. That one slipped by to June 2016, but basically it's all expenditures and income to date when this report was generated. And since we're pretty new into the fiscal year, I just let it go. As we get closer, we'll really start seeing more accurate numbers, especially with the budget versus actual. By January, we'll be able to see a clear picture of which way we're going.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we understood what we were looking at. Any other questions for the manager? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tim. And that'll bring us to legal counsel's report.
I have no additional report.
Thank you, Mr. Takis. And Mr. Member White for the treasurer's report.
According to the paperwork to which you just referred, checking balance is $25,846. Total on-hand monies, $483,116. Activities have been $20,696 expenditures and $34,960 deposits. And reflecting on what the manager said, I really don't have anything else to report since we're so early in the year. But I will ask, do any of the members have a specific item or something they want me to concentrate on looking at?
Vice Chairman Peterson.
I have a question. Of the $483,000 on hand, how much is prepaid rents?
Tim on that, but I believe that is, well, I thought that was right here at the top. Where is that?
We now have our deferred lease cash reserve line, right? Tim, go ahead.
Yes, sir. It's under the balance sheet, deferred lease cash reserve.
Yes, line 3101. That would be the third one
If
down.
I'm looking at it right, that's 361,000. My eyes aren't working anymore. Steve, just to clarify for me, is according to statute or any other rules, are the prepaid rents utterly untouchable by us? Or are there any rules by which it can be accessed?
No, my understanding from talking to Beth Cohn, the CPA, is we're not permitted to spend those funds.
Okay, so for all intents and purposes, we've got 100 and something thousand that we can do anything with in the operation of the airport.
That's correct. It would be those other three items, the gate card fees, which are reserved for gate cards. Right. And then it's really the first two items. It's the designated reserves and the checking, which are available to you to spend.
So it's not really an action, as you put it, for the treasurer, but I would put it before all of us. That's pretty thin. We need to find a way to get liquid.
Okay, I'd like to add something. This has probably just slipped my mind. We did receive the personal property tax revenue from the city last week, and it was $202,000 and change. It is not reflected in this paperwork. When this report was generated, we hadn't received the deposit yet. Of course, the minute I did get the deposit, it went right into the money market, which is the designated reserves.
So we saw an uptick of about $200,000 since the time of print on this. Now, I saw at this time of print accounts receivable of $104,000. Now, those monies in the accounts receivable line 2,000 do not include anticipated tax revenue. We don't put the city on as an AR line. That's other monies.
Actually, Beth does.
Okay.
In January, she will place a reserve for next year's expected property revenue. That's kind of how she does it. So I let her handle that. She works the magic, and she also works the magic with the deferred lease cash reserve to adjust that as appropriate. Oh. What did I say? Okay. Beth handles the personal property revenue that she will adjust in January. And she also deals with the deferred lease cash reserves. Usually once or twice a year, she'll adjust that. And you'll see that change over the period of this fiscal year. She handles all that. I sit back and watch and see the magic happen. So.
And to refresh our memories, the annual allocation from the deferred lease cash reserve that's released into our real money, okay, as we earn those basically, is that done on a month-to-month basis, or is that on a once-a-year basis?
She generally does that per quarter when she comes into the office, and sometimes she actually takes over my computer from afar, and she will make those adjustments from her office.
So just to sort of help address Vice Chairman Peterson's question, because I don't remember the number right offhand, do you recall about what the annual dollar chunk is across the $361,000 lease reserve? I know that there are different timings and things, what it is roughly.
I don't recall, but I can get you that information and get an email to you.
I think that would be good to just remind ourselves of, because it plays into that liquidity question. So, thanks. Okay, if there are no other questions for our treasurer, item K, general report from authority members, items of interest or goings on about the Fair Airfield that we ought to know about. Member Shirk.
I received a letter, an email about helicopter tours coming out of Carson City airports. I didn't know if that was true and correct. And if it is, they're complaining about the noise. I'm just passing along email I received.
We have a lot of helicopter operations, but not tours. There is a tour company that does helicopter rides out of South Lake Tahoe. I have not heard whether they're trying to base here. And if they are, then that would be news to me, and they would certainly have to appear before the authority and ask permission to do so.
That's what I thought too. All right, thanks. Now I can respond.
I will make one report from an authority member just to close out an item that was on my plate. I presented to Mr. Rowe this evening the invoice for the airport water line construction. So that was the $46,000 that had been approved for construction of the water line from the Lockheed Way cul-de-sac under the Clickbond property to the airport perimeter. So that work, as I've mentioned previously, is complete, and now the invoice is in Mr. Rowe's hands so that we can close that item up and have our books in order. So I want to just let everyone know that I've done my homework. If there's no other authority member reports, it's item L, public comment, round 2. Members of the public who wish to address the airport authority may speak on items discussed on the agenda related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. And if your item requires extended discussion, request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future meeting. Do we have any public comment at this time? Seeing none. Agenda items for the next regular meeting. Let's recap the ones that we have so far. And Tim, did you have some notes to get us started?
Okay, do we want to continue or rewrite the actions, discussion and possible action regarding NRS 496-080?
Yes, I'll get something together for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be great to fuse perhaps that other draft agenda item you had with this and kind of understand what that looks like after you've had a chance to chat. And yeah, we have time.
You want to? While I think they go together, I think they are two separate actions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, however you see fit.
Okay.
Okay. And we will have, I believe, depending on what Mr. Rowe learns, probably a cricket-related action. And I know there was one more. It's been a long night. There was one more, I believe, that we were talking about for September. Maybe we covered it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tamar. Keeping us straight. Yes, we should have our RFPs for the responses for the security patrol and be able to take action there. So those are my known ones, and obviously we have several weeks here to bring any others that are necessary. Unless there are any other agenda items forthcoming, that brings us to action N. Action on adjournment. Is there public comment on agenda items? No, it's a non-action item.
It's already called for public.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's late.
We did L. We did L. That brings us to action N, action on
we adjourn.
adjournment. There you go.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.